everyone. Welcome to Forget Me Not Radio, the podcast where we discuss taboo topics and other issues society would rather silence. I'm Amy Dommett, and I'm your host. Today, I sat down and talked with Rosie. Rosie's a survivor of intimate partner abuse. She survived years of abuse at the hands of her husband, and she shares with us her experiences in childhood and how even when we think we do everything right in choosing a mate, or how strong we think we believe we are as an individual, we can miss critical signs and find ourselves in a very difficult and dangerous situation. Hers is a story of strength and healing that you won't want to miss. This is actually part 1. Part 2 will be aired down the line because we had to split it up. But that's okay because, like I said, her story is phenomenal and you'll want to hear all about it. For more information about Forget Me Not Radio, you can visit amydommett.com. That's amydaumit.com/podcast, where you can learn about upcoming episodes and guests, as well as support this project through patreon.com or PayPal. It is through supporters like you that we are able to bring this podcast series to you each week. Subscribe to us on iTunes to stay up to date with the new episodes. And if you're already a subscriber, we would love to have you rate and review us. Your feedback is important, and it helps others find us. Thank you again for joining us. I'll see you on the other side, where happiness and beauty reside. Everybody, this is Amy, and today we are here with Rosie. Hi, Rosie.
Hello.
Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me today. And Rosie is here as a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm really, really thankful to you to be willing to share your story with us and tell us a little bit about what it's like to live through that, and you know, it's very different from story to story, and it's often very different from what society may believe it to be, or people on the outside may believe it to be. So I just want to thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And it's been a big journey to even be able to talk about what I went through and to, I guess, appreciate a lot more things now. I'm a survivor. I love that you use that term rather than victim, because there are victims. Obviously, there's people who suffer harm from others, but after a while it becomes a choice if you continue to allow yourself to be victimized, or if you decide, no, I'm going to put that past me, I'm going to move on, and it's going to be something that hopefully has made you stronger. And in my case, I'm really trying hard to use that as something that makes me stronger, has helped me to better understand myself, to perhaps recognize certain things, certain patterns from my past, from the family I grew up in and things like that, and to also be more sensitive to others. I think back now, and before it happened to me, I used to have all sorts of assumptions and judgments and doubt about women and men if I ever heard about them experiencing something like domestic violence or abuse. And it's a lot more complicated than it seems, and it's not always as cut and dried as, I call it the stereotype of the blue collar worker with the red pickup truck from a bad cable TV movie. Yes, that's obvious. The guy who's like completely beating somebody up to a pulp and they're in the hospital all the time. There's shades to that. That's, just perhaps one extreme. And there's other forms that can take, and it could be, it could be someone who's very charming, smooth talking, a professional. I mean, it could be people who are highly, highly educated, and the shame and embarrassment I had that, how could it happen to me? I'm an educated woman. I had a successful professional career. I was financially independent. Fortunately, a lot of that shame and embarrassment is faded away as I've sought to get help and sought to better understand and heal.
I'm over here and on audio you can't see it, but I'm grinning and giving you a thumbs up because anybody who's read my blog or has listened to me speak anywhere, I was joking earlier that Rosie sounds like me on, maybe we don't, but when I was listening through the earphones during our sound check, I was like, oh, I thought I was listening to myself, and I realized it was you. But hearing your words right now, it's so much right along the same lines of what I say. And I pound on this in my blog. I'm like, you have to choose to be a survivor, and how sometimes I struggle and I fall into victim status, and how I don't want to be a victim and I refuse to be a victim. And it's just, I love hearing you say that, because too often I think that there's a lot of pity or fault that's placed on people that have found themselves in domestic violent relationships.
Oh, absolutely. And I totally agree that for me I struggle every day. It's, I'm about, I guess from the worst of it, more than a year out. But I still have my daily struggles and staying motivated and staying, focused on being a survivor and moving on and not letting that, those years or that particular relationship, however you want to define it, define my life for me. And it's funny, I listen to I listen to podcasts, TED Talks, all that sort of stuff. And I still remember it's funny, it was someone who was born with his name is Sean Stevenson. He was born with sort of a genetic condition where he has it's a sort of dwarfism, and he has to use a wheelchair. And one thing that really struck me is he said that pity is one of the most dangerous things you can do, because it gives you an excuse to not go for your dreams and to not say, hey, I want more out of life. And I just have to try my best and do everything I can to reach it. Pity sort of puts you in this position of, well, I can't help it. My life's out of control. And absolutely, there are things that we can't control, but there's so much that we can control. And it's hard. I still sometimes go back to that victimhood, especially when you get angry and emotional, because emotions are natural. And I try just to just kind of let it out and then let it pass. And I even try to help my child, who's been affected by all this. He's only 4 years old, so I'm trying to help him understand as well, hey, it's okay to have an emotion, but don't dwell on it. Let it have its moment, and then sort of try to move on. And it's so interesting that the patterns you start to hear, because the past year I've spent trying to heal has been I go to support groups every week, and I've gone to trauma therapy. And so I've met, several survivors, and I'm like, oh my gosh, why do I always feel like I'm hearing my story? It might be a little different,
right?
Some different economic circumstances, some different cultural stuff, but the patterns are the same. And it's just kind of crazy.
We talk about that as when we're having discussions on domestic violence or abuse in general. We talk about how those patterns and how the damage, the aftermath, or I call it the collateral damage, it's like that after effect that just keeps rippling, is so similar. And it doesn't necessarily matter if it was a dating partner, if it was your marriage, if it was your parents, if you were sexually assaulted or raped. When those traumas are inflicted on you by someone that you care about, or in an intimate way, that often the things that the survivors deal with are almost on par with one another. And I found that out in blogging, because blogs have this great way of just reaching people that you would never ever meet in real life, right? From all over the world, from different parts of the country. And
people were writing back and saying, oh, wow, I'm a child abuse victim. And, you know, I'm struggling with that same, your article on depression and how you feel just resonated with me. And it's just, it's a sad reality of something that so many people struggle with every day. But I have to give you kudos, and I'm not just saying this. I did not realize that you were only a year out or thereabouts. So it took me almost 7 years to actually share my story in pretty much any way. I had tinkered with it a little bit, but not much. So congrats that you got the help that you needed, because that's a huge step.
Yeah, and I still am. Yeah. And it's interesting because so things got to the point where I entered a battered women's shelter, and it's funny because a lot of times people think, oh, they have no money, so on and so forth. I probably could have found a way to get a hotel, but because of the complexity of my situation, the only protection I really had was to be in a place that was anonymous. And it actually, maybe we'll talk about later, but it did play out. My ex did show up to my mother's hotel, and traced her that way, and because she couldn't be in the shelter with me, and lost my train of thought, but it's just thinking back to some of the women, in that shelter. It's all economic,
across the board.
Yeah, across the board. Mainly, I would say like lower middle income, because it is a shelter, and it was just interesting to see how different people chose to do things, and that's maybe where I'm very grateful for my background and maybe the privilege I brought to it, that I'm open to the idea of support groups and therapy and professional help. And I don't believe that someone might try to use that against me, or I understand that, oh, well, professional, I can always just say, okay, I'm going to end this professional relationship. And some people just don't have that experience or knowledge, and might not even seek out that help because they've had bad experiences, or they're afraid, if they tell too much, that maybe something can happen, and there could be an investigation to something. Because another thing I've realized, and this is thinking back to how I used to see domestic violence, was, it is a victim blaming, I guess you can call it. A little bit of the doubting was like, oh, well, that person does drugs, or that person has an anger management issue. And
there's a stigma, or, like you said, people tend to have a blanket view of people in certain situations, no matter what that's, if you're homeless, well, you obviously have a, quote unquote, whatever issue, you're not a hard worker, or you have a mental disability, or you're a drug addict. And that's not always the case at all.
The case.
But people tend to, give these definitions and labels to certain groups of people.
Oh, yeah. And they'll use that label to completely define that person and everything. Oh, it's because they're this.
Right.
So someone could stab them in the street. Oh, well, that's going to happen to somebody who's homeless.
Right.
And that's not okay. You still have to look at every individual circumstance. And it's, and so I guess that's for me, I didn't even think about it that, like, well, I'm just a year out. That, I don't know, I feel like I've made a lot of progress. What's complicated about my situation is I still have contact with my abuser. And I have to. That's kind of a complicated situation. But for me, I've had to learn how to really manage that, both from a safety planning perspective, just a pure physical safety perspective, and also emotional safety. And I'm dealing with things, and I avoided drama my whole life.
Ironic, isn't it?
Avoided drama my whole life, and thinking back, I think my abuser used that against me, because I'm the type that like, oh, let me let it go. Is it that big? Much of is it that big of a deal? Let me let it go. And now, unfortunately, I have to live with almost daily drama or weekly drama, whatever you want to call it. It flares up. There's this whole cycle, and I think my cycle just looks a little bit differently now. With my abuser, where he kind of calmed down, and then again, escalation, and then he'll do something crazy, and I have to deal with that, and it's just a part of my reality now. And instead of saying like, oh, woe is me, why do I have to deal with this? Sometimes I have those feelings, it's natural, but I'm like, fine, there's people who have to deal with other things. Okay, let me try to model myself in those survivors of domestic violence, of something else, let me try to be like those people who are really strong, and I can still have a life of my dreams while I'm dealing with this, this situation that I really wish I didn't have to deal with, but unfortunately I do, at least for now.
That's a great attitude to have. And you just hit on so many important topics just there in that little blip that I want to come back to. So keep a mental note, because I want to talk about how the cycle of abuse is still continuing, and it's just in a different context now, and how the idea of no contact versus having to have contact, because you and I are very different in that respect, and and what it really boils down to is you have a child. So I want to talk about those things, but before we get into all of that, I think it's really important for the listeners to have an understanding of kind of the story from the beginning. So, and when I say the beginning, I mean all the way back to the beginning. Tell me about who Rosie was as a child, or just your life growing up, what your family looked like, because again, there's a lot of stereotypes around abuse victims, and I want, through these stories that we're going to be telling, I want our listeners to get this idea and this whole broad understanding of all the different survivors that are out there and how varying their stories are. So.
Sure, yeah. What I'll start off by saying is I grew up in a middle-class household. Both my parents are college graduates. My dad actually has a master's degree. And now I'll mention that my parents are immigrants from India, and my dad actually came here to do a second master's degree. My dad came here in the late 60s, and my mom came in the mid-70s, so they've been here a long time. Like many immigrant households, I grew up with a blend of Indian and American culture, and that was sort of part of growing up. I'm more Indian, I'm more American. It took me many years to realize, hey, I can just be me. I have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I've had these life experiences. I don't have to define myself as one or the other. I can just be me, and everything's a part of me. So growing up, there was definitely that pull of traditions and wanting to fit in at school, and before I went through what I went through, I would have characterized my growing up environment as a lot of love, and there was a lot of love, and also a lot of push to achieve. And this is one thing I'm grateful for. My parents were very much do everything you can in school, really go for everything that you can possibly. But they always wanted me to balance that with the idea that, your real duty in life is going to be a mother, to be a wife, but you should have a backup plan, right? And like many parents from India and Asia, they were first thing, try to become a doctor. But they were focused on, do one of those shorter 6-year programs. There's a combined bachelor's, medical school program. I didn't get into one of those.
Didn't know that.
So you're going to be too old to get married if you do the regular doctor route, or, unless you might be pushing it. So why don't you do something else, like in engineering, science, and all that? So, and so I did that, and there was the .com boom had happened. And so, it made sense. And to me, it wasn't, it's funny because growing up in American cultures, now it might be different after Occupy Wall Street and all these sort of things. But back then it was, people were very much into follow your dreams. If you want to study art history, do that. But my parents were very practical. Okay, what jobs are going to,
what's going to give you a paycheck?
Yeah, a good secure paycheck, and what's practical, and that, and I'm grateful for it now, because I sort of see those people who struggled, right? And so that's what I did. I was always very focused on doing well, very aware of community reputation, the Indian community reputation, and it's part of daily life, I would call it, for most Indian people. You're always so aware of what will people think.
Why is that? Me being someone who's not from that culture, that's interesting to me.
I've wondered a lot about it. I think it's because traditionally in that culture, so if you think about India even today, it's, the government, law and order isn't the way it is in countries, developed countries like the United States or, Europe and so on. It's a lot more if you need to get something done is through your connections, and you develop those connections over many generations of trust sometimes, or sometimes your lifetime. And people sort of, apparently credit checks and things like that are getting more popular now, but traditionally there's no credit check. Your credit check is you ask around people, what's that family like? What's that child like? What do you know about them?
Everything's based on reputation and history.
Yeah, reputation, history, or family honor, or family standing.
And that makes sense.
And it's just something always to be aware of. And even here you see that somebody gets some bad press about some incident, and do people interpret it this way or that way? And so to me, it didn't necessarily make sense. Like, this is crazy. Why do they care so much about reputation? It's like, no, it makes sense because
I think that's a product of the time we grew up in as well. Because if you went back 50 years or 60 years, I'm probably not doing the math right anymore, but if you went back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, that was a lot more common.
Yeah.
The local store, everybody had their reputation or, got their financial support, from whatever, and it was 100% based on what kind of businessman you were, how trustworthy you were, or how kind you were of a person. That
and I imagine even probably in some smaller communities in the United States, it's like that way today. And so that was the environment I grew up in. Always very aware of what will people think. And now having gone through what I went through, I realized that I had developed certain habits because of things that were happening in my home. My dad, he even admits, but now, well, he's admitted for some time, but he has anger issues. I would even call it rage issues. But the way he saw it was, oh, that's just how I was born. That's just how I am.
Right.
I can't do anything about it. And I kind of grew up seeing that, okay, there's one thing you hear in school about how people should act and on TV, how people should act, but you keep your home matters inside your home. You kind of show a certain face. You don't let people know about these things happening in your home. It looks bad and everybody does it. That was just sort of the environment I grew up in. And it was just, I didn't know any better. I mean, to me, that was normal. And
I think that's common, good or bad. I mean, that's almost, I want to say like, this is a human thing. I don't even, I'm sure that it is much stronger in certain cultures than others, but that behind closed doors, what happens in the home is a home issue. What happens between a couple is between a couple. It's looked down upon if you go to your mother or your father or your best friend and share intimate private details of what's happening in your home. That's fairly rampant and common even in today's society here.
And it's even, because I also believe in, like, if you have a relationship with somebody, it is good to respect the trust.
Yes, definitely.
But then there's sort of a line, right? If someone's really crossing the line, then I think you have the right to reach out for help. And
being able to differentiate.
Yeah, and that's tricky. And that definitely wasn't something I grew up with, right? It was very much like, don't let people know what's happening. And I also grew up with a very judgmental family. They were doing the same sort of judging to people sort of that I didn't want to be judged as, like, oh, those kids are bad because they don't listen to their parents. And that girl's bad. She goes out at night with, has boyfriends and all that. I was raised basically that my parents will help find somebody for me. I get to interview them, but, it's not like against my, arranged marriage against my will or anything like that. But that this is like the stable way to get married. And, these Americans, these Westerners have so many divorces. And, I was kind of told divorce is typically frivolous. There's very few cases, which fortunately my parents did agree, like, okay, abuse, is a good reason for divorce.
This is a good example of when it's acceptable.
Yeah, acceptable, but that's not majority. Majority are just sort of like, the wind blew this way, I'm going to get divorced. So let's, do our traditional way. And for me, just the things I kind of saw as I got older, my parents were very strict, actually. I wasn't allowed really to have friends. I didn't go to prom, homecoming, anything like that.
Stand on some things.
Yeah, but like my fun for me back then, even now, was I volunteer. I try to be in leadership at school. Everything that would help basically my college application was like quote social for me, and that's pretty much all they supported. Homecoming, prom, there was like no, let's debate team. Sure, yeah, you can go. You can go on this overnight conference, for debate, but forget something like prom or whatever. And at the time, it was hard, definitely, but, I don't have regrets or anything. That was just my life, and kind of just the environment I was in, and, just really being under my parents' thumb, and any social time I had was, like, with other Indian kids in the community, and, like, our families were there. There was, like, very little, like, sleepovers and all that, and, it's always, like, family. There's always people there. So I really wanted to go to college out of state. Like, I knew I'd love to be free. I'd think of the Little Mermaid song, Part of That World, like how Ariel
Funny how we do that when we're young.
I was like, I want to be like Ariel and go to another world and explore it for myself. And
I was Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's so funny. Like, so it's, so I was like I give my parents, I did not rebel like at all. I mean, the most I might have rebelled was like once I said, no, Mom, I'm not going to fold my laundry. And actually there was some physical stuff in my home too. My mom slapped me. There's some physical stuff.
It was very strict and controlled atmosphere.
Yes, absolutely. Very strict and controlled atmosphere. And then I was just in fear. I was genuinely in fear of my parents, like, especially my dad. My dad had so much rage. So a lot of it's just like walking on eggshells, don't make him mad. And so I was a really, really good kid. So my parents were like, oh, you're so good. Okay, you can go to, school out of state. And I went for 1 year and then came back. And that was a whole other thing where I put way too much pressure on myself because I was an Ivy League. It was like a, liberal arts college, but I need to transfer to an Ivy League school. And I tried to take, like 10 class. I don't know, I really was kind of overdoing stuff. So I still have that perfectionism and feeling inadequate with, okay, come on, like, we're not all Ivy League students. And, people are, that's not a definer of who's a good person or not. It took me a long time.
It's funny because you're right, but all of those things add up. The cultural expectations, the family expectations, just then that transfers on to you as for your expectations of yourself and what is acceptable versus not acceptable, or what's prestigious versus not,
And kind of tying it into the idea of reputation, it's also, there's a big awareness of status along with reputation, especially in the Indian community and in society in general. A Harvard doctor, people are like, oh, they're a Harvard doctor, they'll mention that to you. But, he cleans toilets. I mean, they'll mention it to you as kind of like a negative thing, right? And people...
Or they don't talk about it.
I
work at school.
Yeah, and it's and for me, I guess I also realized, okay, if I had all this stuff behind me, maybe people would treat me differently. I guess I was almost embarrassed of not being like that, living up to that super high potential. Oh yeah, I remember back then as well, the Miss India pageants were very popular. They had, kind of Miss India USA and all this sort of stuff, and, the local states and all that. So the ideal Indian American woman back then was, okay, she won like Miss India something and went to Harvard and did a medical degree.
She had everything. She
had everything.
She was academically at the top of her class.
Yeah.
She was a beauty
and
queen.
She looks like a model or actor, whatever. And
quite a high standard too.
Yeah. Oh, and she cooks a mean, dinner, cooks everything from scratch and has a warm, loving personality, respectful to her elders, all this stuff. Yeah. But that was like the ideal, right. every aspect of that I was trying in some way to live up to. So went to college, came back, and then lived at home for most of college. I did do a science engineering degree, so STEM. And it's just funny now because they talk so much about STEM, like these are women
never heard about that 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I was back in Colorado, back where I grew up, and I was like, okay, I want to leave again. I want to go work in a bigger city. I was in a mid-sized city. So, and again, the Ariel wants to explore, the world kind of thing with Little Mermaid. And I fortunately got a job offer in Washington, D.C. And I moved to D.C. And again, I've been a very good girl, don't do anything, and I genuinely was. It wasn't an act. Like, right. I wasn't... in college, actually, some of my closest friends I called them the religious girls. I'm not Muslim, but a lot of my friends were, Muslim girls who, were following their faith. Some of my best friends are actually very Christian kind of girls, and just, people
subscribe to a certain moral set
that
they follow.
Yeah, so I think I've been to, I went to one frat party my whole life, and I was there for 10 minutes, and I didn't drink alcohol back then, so... I was out of there, and we all had curfews. We're 21 years old, 20 years old, and we have curfews. I still remember being in a movie with my friend. We're watching a movie, and she's like, "Oh no, it's 10:30. I gotta go."
You get up and leave in the middle of the movie.
Friend with kind of strict Christian parents, and but that was actually a nice community for me, and it kind of encouraged me. Right. I don't think of that as a negative. Actually, I don't see it as a negative.
It's great to surround if you're on a certain path, you need to surround yourself with people that are on that path because it helps keep you motivated. It doesn't matter what it is that you're motivating towards, or motivated towards.
And it made me feel like less like an oddball, and I did kind of see my parents' points about like, sometimes people are doing things that are, chasing something, chasing thrills, and I didn't want to do that. And I would also see, like, I had, even people in classmates, I might not be a close friend, but like, oh, I'm not sure if that guy's serious about me.
Right.
There was this big thing back then about, oh, men don't want to commit. And so this all kind of colored
I think that's still going on.
So, okay, yeah. so all this was kind of like shaping my ideas, right, about what a relationship is like and so on. And I remember one of my really good friends, an Arab Muslim girl, this girl was the coolest girl. She was explaining to some people, and because I was still doing a lot of extracurriculars in college too. Again, how do I get the really good job? I have to be outstanding, this and that.
Build that resume.
So build that resume. And I remember her explaining to people, like arranged marriage is kind of like the Bachelorette or the Bachelor. All these guys have to basically prove themselves, and they're fighting for you, and they have to your parents really interview them, and she made it seem like the coolest thing. I'm like, that's right, this is awesome. You have no doubt if this guy's serious about you because he's going straight to you about, I want to marry you. No, we'll see how things work out. And to me, that sounded great. My thinking's different now, but back then that sounded great. Right, again, seeing like the, people crying because, I thought he was, he broke up with me and this and that. So this is, what my thoughts sort of going in, after college.
So. I can understand that. I can see where that would make sense.
Yeah, it made sense from so many angles, and I was like, great. And so I graduated. Then my parents, started looking for somebody for me, and met some guys. My mom chaperoned, and there was always a lot of fun with those. It was just, it's just, you can imagine, like, in this day and age, there was still, about 10 years ago, or a little bit more than 10 years ago. But, it's a little different. Fun. It's just like when a guy's trying to impress you, and then my mom goes to the bathroom, and then he, tells me something, and I had a lot of fun. And it's just nice, like a guy's really trying to impress you type of thing. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. You see the clash, and, it's fine. And, I mean, these were... From the, what I kind of talked about, like, okay, what's your status and reputation? These were guys who fit the mold, educated guys, from, quote, good families. And, they weren't the exciting, charming guy necessarily. These are guys who maybe, okay, he went to a really good school and now he's a doctor, or he was, and
again, they had the
was
resume.
An engineer, and he was at this Ivy League MBA school, and, so it all worked, right? And, but no one quite clicked. And so I'm, focused on my career, and now that I was truly free, and I also had my own financial resources because my parents were very restrictive. I mean, I didn't work in high school, and they're like, no, you can't work. No child of ours is going to work, and just a different thinking they had about that. I did some internships in college, only professional internships and all that, but that wasn't a ton of money. Now I'm working, I'm making my own money. If I want to go travel abroad, I can. And I still remember I went to visit one of my friends in Argentina where her family was living. She was, doing a master's program. I knew her from college, and my parents were like, don't ever tell anybody. Don't ever tell Indians that you went on this trip. And then I later went to Spain with some friends. Don't ever tell anybody because they'll say, oh, she left. What is she doing? Right? I guess the implication is that I'm being promiscuous or something. Right. Apparently it was a big deal.
Uncontrolled.
It was a big deal. I'm even living away from my parents, so far, and my parents are definitely on the extreme of the Indians. There's a lot of Indians who don't care about this stuff. I've met a ton since. My parents were just a little bit more extreme, and maybe it's also where our family comes from in India. It's kind of a more conservative state, but for everybody else, it's probably a little bit too much too many details, but. My parents were very.
It's interesting, and I think it all plays into everything again. All of that adds up to where you are today, no matter what your backstory is.
So, nothing's quite working out. I'm getting older, and all the time the target's moving. Oh, you need to be married by 24. Okay, 25, it's okay. Well, if you're 27, it's okay. You're not too old. I mean, the idea is you're washed up first. It's funny, the older I got, apparently even Indian society was changing, Indian American society was changing, where people are getting married at later ages. But it started changing as I got older. It was
following you.
Yeah, it was when my parents were 22. The idea of being 30 and unmarried was insane to them. Like, oh my gosh, your life is over. And, but now it's funny today, like, oh yeah, there's something, so my mom will tell me, oh, so you grew up with, she finally got married, she's in her mid-30s, and I'm like, oh, that's great. And my mom's not, not making her snide comments. Things have changed, but it changed at a different pace. So, I'm getting older. I'm feeling like, oh, I'm never going to get married, and feeling embarrassed, and I'm trying to figure out, should I go to grad school? But Mom's like, oh no, you're going to get married by next year. Don't, you figure out with your husband if you go to grad school, if that makes sense. And so I'm sort of in this, this is sort of what's going on. And, I started trying some different things. So, I go out at night, I don't have a curfew anymore. I was, if you haven't figured out already, I was pretty religiously observant. So I was the sort of person to be Saturday night out at the club, and I gotta go home, guys. Midnight, I have to be at, temple at 9 in the morning. And, some people would come with me, and I didn't drink, and then might have tried drinking a few times, didn't care for it. So it's like, no, I'll just kind of stick to my, what I believe. And so I was trying to balance being like the cool girl, who kind of goes out and is, and can still have that fun, but, sort of be who I am.
Not
with
completely undermining your principles.
Yeah, my principles, which are kind of like, did I totally believe in those principles or not? I wasn't sure, but I was just following them. They made sense. And so finally, some things happened in my life where before the person I married, actually, I met a guy through a friend, and it was just friends at first, and we ended up liking each other. And he was also Indian. He was a successful guy, working on Wall Street in New York. I was actually on a work assignment in New York. I used to travel a lot with my job in DC, so I wasn't always just in DC. I would travel as well to different work assignments, and it was serious. And we approached my parents, and my parents were infuriated. Oh, but he didn't go to an Ivy League undergrad, and oh, he's like from this other group in India, and that kind of fell apart. It was like the first boyfriend I ever had, I guess you could say, and that our engagement broke, and I didn't speak to my parents for a year after that.
Wow.
So I'm not speaking to my parents for a year. It was just. I think I was mad because I've been such a good, perfect girl. I've not even met another person who's as good and perfect and follow the rules as myself, and yet you won't give me this. There was a lot of, I don't know. I didn't rebel, but it was hard.
I could see where that would make you very bitter.
Yeah, it did make me bitter.
And it's hurtful, and I can see where that would raise a lot of emotions. And you finally find someone that makes you happy, and
this guy was a good guy. I mean, he was an investment banker on Wall Street, very close to his family, very strict family like mine. In some ways more strict. His families also don't believe in drinking. And, there's a lot of Indians who love to drink, but our families both were a little bit more religious types, don't drink and all this stuff, don't drink, vegetarian, Hindu sort of stuff. And his parents were very educated. His dad's a professor, his mom's a doctor, but my parents were like, oh no, they're not good enough, for little nitpick things. And I don't know. So I was in a vulnerable place, basically. It was tough. Spending the holidays. I had friends, fortunately, that I spent those with. But, I wasn't really, I didn't speak to my parents at all, actually, for a year plus. And then I went to a happy hour and happened to meet the man who I would later marry. And it's funny because I remember now that at that time, I was going through what I call kind of a fun phase, meaning I had a friend of mine that said, look, it's not just the arranged marriage way that a woman can maintain her respect or power, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to let some guy lead me on. You can also just treat it as fun. Hey, until you show me you're serious, I'm not going to treat this more than anything, just like we're hanging out. And I think that back then, He's Just Not Into You was a popular book and movie. And then from that, I kind of read the Rules book, which was another old book. That was a lot about letting the man chase you, right? And men like to chase. And I remember thinking, I like that idea. I like a man who's going to chase me, make it clear he's into me. And I don't know, I just like the idea of kind of, I don't know, that sort of male-female dynamic, and maybe the male's a little bit more of a leader. And because I'd also seen friends who would complain about he doesn't like their boyfriend or their husband or whoever, he never takes charge, or I always have to tell him what to do, he's lazy. And so to me, I was like, well, maybe it's, we're all kind of in this interesting era of where, women and men can do pretty much everything that you can do whatever you want. There's no oh, you can't be this because you're that. But, I was trying to figure out for myself as well, okay, well, I used to call it like maybe because I came from like an engineering science background and was working in a male-dominated field, and I always felt like kind of confused, like, I have to act one way at work, but really I'm a girly girl. I like wearing pink, and I felt almost like embarrassed to tell people that, because they'll be like, okay, it was almost association, if you're a girly girl, you're not smart.
Yes.
So I guess I'm touching a lot of different things, but this is all been going on in my mind.
And I worked in law enforcement, and I after my marriage, and that was a constant contradiction, because I was and still am a teacher and like a mothering figure, and I don't think I'd ever say I was like a girly girl. I've always been more of like a tomboyish type, mentality, but it was hard, like you said, because you have to have this demeanor when you're at work, but it's almost, it might be a little bit you, but at the same time, because you're smart and you're a take charge type of person. So it was one thing to be authoritative but I used to say all the time, and I'd somewhat joke, but it was very, very real. I'd say, I need a man that at least meets me, meets me, is not a step ahead of me, because, my personality is so not, what I don't know how to describe. My personality is very assertive and very forthright and could be very demanding. And if a guy can't at least meet me and kind of keep me in check, per se, in a good way, in a healthy way, I'm going to end up walking all over him. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be with that kind of person.
I totally relate to what you're saying.
It's hard to balance that life when you have to be one thing at work, and then you almost switch gears when you get home in your social world.
Yeah, and I still even today, I haven't figured out exactly, how I feel about all that. At least now I'm not maybe double thinking. I'm like, hey, if I feel like wearing a pretty dress and totally glamming out, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. Now, I might not totally glam out for a job interview,
right?
If I'm giving a presentation of a certain type, but I'll kind of pick and choose how and when, right? And have one personality at work, or volunteer stuff, or whatever it is.
The different hats.
Yeah, wear the different hats and kind of switch to a softer side of me, or tap into another side of me. So at this happy hour, I'm sort of just, again, having fun, not taking it seriously. So I met my husband. I met actually a couple other guys at that same happy hour. and one I actually connected. Yeah, one I connected with more than my husband. In fact, I remember my now ex-husband. I remember thinking this guy's such a player charmer, because he just had that very smooth talking kind of. He was handsome, very smooth talking.
Yeah, they're dangerous.
Yeah, I was like, this guy's a player, whatever. And I connected more with another person. So, true to a player, my now ex-husband, he didn't really call me right away, whatever, and it's just, whatever. Another person in the rotation, and so I was seeing this other guy, and and it was very fresh, right? The other guy, but then I was like, okay, hey, why not meet with this guy, meet with my now ex-husband. So I remember when we finally got together to meet. First it was just, let's get together for, drinks or whatever, coffee. I was actually flying out to see my mom the next day. So just around the time, it was just a couple days before we met, my dad had called and left a message for me saying my mom was in the hospital. So I remember thinking, okay, I'll go fly out to see them and maybe talk to them again. This is, I don't know, I just felt comfortable doing that. So I, booked this last minute flight, but I was, it was the next morning, and I don't know, I guess I'm kind of good at compartmentalizing, and I just met with them, was flirty, whatever, and it's funny, I back then I was sort of, this is probably gonna sound bad, but my friend and I had this thing about we can kind of predict it's almost if you act a certain way, it brings out a certain thing in a guy, and he'll end up paying for everything. And I don't know, I'm not proud of it, but it used to be kind of this thing about like, oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so with
it happens a lot in dating. Sadly, and I mean, it's a game on both sides.
Yeah, it's a game on both sides, and there's guys who'll lead a girl on. Oh, yeah, I'm serious about you, and then he disappears and poofs. So it's sort of both sides, and so my ex paid for everything, and he didn't come on super strong right away, right? I was watching him, the player, but in fact, he walked me. We got together for cocktails. And then we had like a little appetizer, and then I was actually meeting other friends after, and he didn't want to come to that. So, he just walked me over, and then we got together to do a hike. And I remember during the hike, like this was like a week later, I guess, we went hiking. And I remember being like, oh, I don't know, the way he talked about his like family and his, his faith and all this, and just a lot of things. I was like, wow, like he's a player on the outside, but, there's another side to him. But I'm going to watch, and slowly over time, like he came out ahead of all the other guys. And we just got closer and closer, and I don't know, we just really connected. And the way I saw it back then was, oh, cool, here's another guy who's as easygoing as me. I was, again, very, I mentioned early on that I avoid drama.
Right.
I like to avoid drama. I believe, as much as possible, just let people do what they want to do. If someone's treating you poorly, I was maybe too extreme, but I used to just completely cut them out of my lives. I would give them like 10 chances, but after that, I would just cut them out, and I won't say anything mean to them.
Interesting thing you mentioned too, and it's funny because I've never had it. Sorry, I cut you off, but I've never actually had somebody else say that to me, and I do the exact same thing. Like, I will basically allow you to walk all over me multiple times, and I'll give you a free pass. But for some reason, I'm not really sure where that number is, but there will be this one last time that you do it, and I'm just like, I can't even deal with you anymore. And it's like I hit the off switch, and you will be gone. I have no more tolerance from you. And I'm not always proud of that fact, because I keep telling myself, I think there has to be a better way to deal with this.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have the conflict.
Exactly.
I don't want to have the conflict. And I don't remember if I was that way before my marriage. That's like, I should probably have conversations with people and say, hey, was I like this? Like before, before I got married and lived with him, because I don't remember. But I know now, I'm like, I'll give you a chance. But when it gets to the point that it's affecting me, I'm going to snap, and that's going to be the end of it, because I don't need this in my life. That's like my thought process. So, and I've never had anybody else mention it. So it's really, I think, something interesting to delve into at some point.
Maybe we're seeing it in the same way, because I have heard with some other survivors, they'll just talk about like, I did what he said, or I don't know, some of them, I mean, there's some that are, everyone has a different personality, but I've met some others, some survivors that are maybe more feisty, and you can say, okay, this is someone, it's funny because it's like, wow, they seem like they stand up for themselves. How did they end up in that situation?
Those are my dad's words to me. Almost verbatim. Has anybody else did this to you, you would have knocked their teeth down their throat. Why is it that he got away with it? I don't understand.
And then I've met some other that are really nice like me. Maybe it's a kind of Midwest thing. Maybe it's like you grew up in a certain type of community thing, but just we're just really nice. And I do try to define myself as a nice person. I try to be nice. I'm not one of those people who doesn't let you merge in the traffic. I say go ahead. I don't care if 3 people merge. I try not to do it too much, but because I also want to be efficient with traffic flow. But
just kindness towards others.
Yeah, kindness towards others, and it can be dangerous because I'm also I avoid conflict. I'm very conflict avoidant, and I think it's because I grew up with that rage. Instead of I just hate fighting and ugliness and the anger, and I've avoided it my entire life. I've let people take advantage of me. I let companies take advantage of me. Bad customer service take advantage of me, because I'd rather avoid just those feelings I get when I have to kind of argue with somebody. I'm a little bit different now. Like, I think a desperate situation has brought out another side of me, and especially having a child. The mother there kind of comes out, but
more protective in general of your surroundings and your life.
Yeah, like sort of now it's different. But when I met my now ex, I was like, oh great, he's easygoing like me, and he did. I mean, he's a very assertive person, very charming, very much take charge, take the lead, but was still respectful, I felt. And
that, mind you, is a good characteristic.
Yeah, good
That's very
characteristics.
attractive to a lot of women, you know, to have that guy that like we just talked about before.
Yeah.
So, you know, you were finding that balance in
I was
him,
finding
it
that
sounds
balance. In fact, I remember I was studying for, I think, the GMAT. I was thinking, okay, I really should apply, you know, for an MBA program or something. And I was studying for that, and I took the exam, and he had like flowers ready, you know, this beautiful bouquet of flowers. And that used to be a big thing for me. I was like, oh, I want a guy to buy me flowers, and a lot of guys don't. And he would do those sort of things, and just, you know, he was supporting me studying for the GMAT. So I didn't think, oh, this is a guy that's going to try to keep me down.
Exactly.
I just didn't see any warning signs. And one thing that, looking back, it was interesting that he talked about marriage fairly soon. And, we never fought, by the way. We never had a single fight. Maybe we had like one little fight, and it was just something, you know, dumb. But we, like, in a year of knowing each other, like, no fights ever. Everyone's like, how is that possible? That's amazing. I said, oh, we're both easygoing people.
I was going to say that can be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because it can be a good thing in that, you know, if you're not fighting, it just means that you're actually communicating and that you're respecting one another. But on the flip side of that, it can also mean that somebody's repressing feelings and not sharing, and you're not communicating, you're not dealing head on with issues. So
yeah, and I'm not sure yet. Nothing really bothered me because I wasn't taking it seriously, and I don't know. I didn't make a lot of demands of him. I just didn't. And I wasn't the type that, oh, I need to know you're not dating anybody else. I was like, he can date whoever he wants. So maybe it was like, because I wasn't.
You were maybe more disconnected.
Yeah, I was more disconnected, and I don't know if that was the healthiest thing to do, but that's this is like the second boyfriend I had in my life. Yeah. You know, like no dating experience.
Right.
So I'm just, you know, doing the best I can, and again, he's just not into you is in the back of my mind. So I'm like, hey, I'm just, until he proposes marriage, it's not serious. And then he started talking about marriage, and there was the whole thing about how do we talk to my parents and all that. So I kind of broke it to my parents, and I think by this point that I was, you know, getting older, and I hadn't spoken to them for a year, and they were sort of like, okay, let's meet this guy, let's see. And then I met his parents, and I remember he was pushing so much, well, your parents are that way, but meet my parents are awesome. And meet his family, meet his friends and everything, and, you know, and I just, the way I saw it at the time was like, oh, well, I'm just not that into him yet, so so it's okay, yeah, I'll meet all his family, but I'm gonna, you know, not let him into my world so much until I'm sure of his commitment, until I'm sure I you know, care about him that much. And I had some doubts about certain things. He was successful, but he was struggling in certain things, and I don't know, I just wondered about his long-term prospects and all that, like, because there's still, again, that Indian side of me that, okay, what's his job, what's, you know, he didn't go to an Ivy League, you know, all this sort of stuff, but he did go to law school, you know, but he's like struggling with getting his bar license, and then, you know, all sort of stuff, and so there's some stuff going on, and then he finally does this huge proposal, and I remember I was having some doubts about him, but I was so overwhelmed with emotion, and I'm like, oh, what the heck, you know, and it's like, it's love, and I mean, it was this amazing proposal that had like multi-parts to it, like, because I flew into town, and like, because he had actually moved away to go clerk with the judge, you know, which is a good thing towards his career.
Definitely.
But it was, you know, just not in Washington, D.C., and I flew in, and then he like drove, you know, did this like boat thing, and it was just this huge thing, very, very beautiful sort of thing. And then, I think my parents were flying into town the next day to meet his family. Well, they turned it into an engagement. Let's celebrate the couple got engaged. And my parents were upset about that. Well, he didn't even ask me. Oh, I guess apparently he called my dad and said, you know, I'm just letting you know I'm proposing to her, whether you accept it or not. And, you know,
I'm sure that went over very well.
Yeah, my parents were very offended.
Yeah.
But when I heard about it later, I was like, well, my parents were so strict, and I still had that bitterness about I've been such a good girl. Why don't you let me have this? I'm not marrying someone who's like a bad person, a drug addict. Well, at the time I didn't know but I was like, I'm not marrying a drug addict, I'm marrying somebody who's a professional, who's very ambitious, and who has an awesome personality. I still remember anytime I think it was after I got engaged, I finally would start, he met some of my friends, but not a lot. But, as he met more people, I remember all, like, my colleagues' husbands were all like, dude, like, let's hang out sometime. Everyone loved him. He was like, so fun. Very fun guy. I think he was even fraternity president, which was kind of remarkable for like an Indian guy. So I remember being like, this
Breaking
guy.
the mold.
And, I'd meet people in DC who had, like, mentored him and, like, we're trying to get him, like, to run for office someday and this and that. So, I mean, this is, like, a real charmer guy. He still is a charmer. And
they often are.
Yeah, and it's funny, I talked to him, like, do you want to run for office? He's like, oh, but I never could. And I was like, why not? You don't have any record. And I guess he had something, like, the thing that was preventing him from his bar admission was, like, something that happened when he was a minor, so it was just, there was some stuff with that. But I'm like, well, that's so minor. I don't think it's going to be an issue. And come on, and I didn't realize till later he had hid a lot of things from me because I, lived a very clean life. Very boring life. I don't think he believed it. And I was like, you don't have to believe it. My truth is my truth. You can think whatever you want to think. I'm here. Take me or leave me,
Right.
And I feel like I was in a pretty good place going into the relationship, right?
Sounds like it. It sounds like you were very
and maybe
clear-minded, which is something I've never been. I'm very emotional, so there was never any, pure emotion.
And I feel like I was being, there's a little bit of emotion, but it was, also like, okay, some practical considerations. And he was pushing, they were all pushing, get married soon. And we're like, well, let's wait for all this stuff with his career to kind of shake out. And they're, he and his family are pushing, let's get them married soon. And I was like, well, we're long distance. Okay, fine. Now, I have to say, things did definitely change after we got engaged. That's when we started having more fights. And I remember he would make certain comments, and I don't remember now when we were just dating if he ever made these comments, but he would make certain comments that I just thought, oh, this is how, the locker room type talk or how guys talk. Like, just stuff like, get in the kitchen and make me a sandwich. And everybody, like, kind of laugh about it. But he wouldn't apologize, and I didn't say anything because I thought, okay,
you think it's a joke, and then you find out it isn't.
Exactly, and I found out it isn't. And at the time, I had a great career. I was making excellent money, and making more than him, clearly, and because he was still trying to get get everything going. And it's funny, although I was making more money than him, but he had more resources just through his family. So he had like the nicer cars, like bigger spending budget, all that sort of stuff. I don't know. There's some differences, but I was like, why am I going to nitpick? People get so picky about getting married. Okay, this guy, we get along. That's good enough. So all that sort of in the back of my mind about it's like, okay, going through, and you always hear about it's very stressful having a wedding, and obviously this, my parents were not supportive, but they finally went along with it. Like, okay, fine, to save face, it'd be worse if I go elope with them. And I was fine. I was like, I don't need this big showy Indian wedding for the community. But my parents were like, okay, fine, So we had a really great wedding, actually. I thought it all worked out. Things weren't perfect, but I thought we had this great spirit of, hey, it's okay, don't take things too seriously. I mean, what I remember from that time especially, it was like we're always laughing together. And we even made like a little video for our wedding together. That was like this fun creative project. But now thinking back again, that video was my idea. I wrote 90% of the script. I did most of it, but then he was like not telling people about that. He was saying, oh, I did that. I even remember at our wedding reception, he got up and gave like this really long speech to everybody, and I don't think he really acknowledged me during it, and I didn't need that. I'm like, I'm not one of those people. I just wanted a beautiful dress. I didn't care about being the super center of attention. I'm like, no, I want this to be about our guests. Everyone should have a good time.
It's like the downfall of being a strong woman or an independent woman is that you don't need the
attention.
Exactly, because you're confident in who you are. But because of that, often, then you miss the blaring red flags that are coming up.
Yeah. And I just thought I'm like an easygoing chick. Look at me. Right. And going into marriage, I remember discussing this with my ex. I was like, look, I don't believe in divorce at all for no reason. If my ex is beating me, get counseling. If he's on drugs or alcoholic, get counseling. We'll live apart. If he murders somebody, okay, go serve your time, but I'll stay married. Like, that was my belief back then. I didn't realize that you can tell somebody to go get counseling and they say no. You're imagining this. I didn't realize, I always assumed that somebody would realize that this is wrong what they're doing.
Well, you're assuming that there's a true love relationship, and you're assuming that there's not an abuser involved.
Yeah.
You're assuming that person is thinking and acting and responding as you would.
Right.
If somebody said to you, "You're hurting me,"
your behavior is hurting me, that would more than likely, I'm guessing, based on our conversations, affect you.
Yeah.
And you would want to fix that and correct that situation.
I would do, if I would do what I can to change it. Now, there's some people who'll just say, oh, you're hurting me, and like, look, I've done everything I can.
Well, yeah.
And then that puts it like, maybe it's best, to be a real friend to you, I'll no longer be around you, right?
Exactly.
And that's, I've kind of come to that now, but yeah, I would not want to hurt somebody. That's the last thing I want to do. And when someone's hurting me, I can barely defend myself back. So let alone, if I'm unintentionally hurting someone else. So we got married. We relocated down to Florida more for his job, and because of my career, I was doing well in my career, and my company was like, hey, we'll transfer you to the South Florida office, and we'll just fly you up to finish your project in DC. And it was a great career. This was normal, like that they fly you in and pay for everything, all that stuff. And so like, okay, great, this isn't ideal, but right now, like, I'll just keep on going up there, especially because I'm the primary earner and he's getting on his feet. And, we did that for a while, and, wasn't quite figuring out, I don't know, just kind of got into this pattern. And it's funny because basically the months of our engagement and then the first 2 years of our marriage, we were kind of weekend husband wife. There was only a few times I would see him for a continuous week, like during the holidays or a vacation or something like that. I really only saw him Thursday evening to Monday morning, and occasionally longer than that. And so naturally it was fun times.
I was just going to say, so it focuses on the happiness and the good things.
It's the weekend, let's go out, let's party, let's go on trips, let's go to great restaurants and all that. And one thing that actually had come up, and he was a big drinker. I would drink with him. I'd increase my alcohol consumption. I thought, maybe this is how cool people are. They go out, they drink. And I have no idea about alcoholism. My parents don't drink at all. I don't know anybody alcoholic. Boring life again, right? Very basic knowledge of alcoholics from what I see on TV.
Right.
Intervention show.
Which again is typically over the top.
Yeah. Or the homeless guy with the paper bag, or homeless lady. And so I don't understand. But, sometimes he would come and he'd, picked me up from the airport, and he was intoxicated, and just, he had kind of a different crowd, like a different crowd of friends than my kind of, boring or semi-boring, or people I kind of know, I hang out with them, but, I don't know them intimately type of friends that I had previously. And so and some of them would drink and drive, and I remember thinking, I've always learned that's the awfulest thing, but they all were kind of drinking and driving, so I thought, oh, maybe I've been in the dark all this time. Maybe this is just kind of like my parents taught me. You see one thing on TV, but behind the scenes something else is going on. Maybe that's it. And I had some concerns about that, wow, he parties hard, but then I thought, okay, it is the weekend, and a lot of his friends are also partying hard, so maybe it's just me that's not, just boring, right? I was conscious that maybe I'm boring. And, I got pregnant. We wanted to have a child. I got pregnant finally. And it was kind of a natural time that I will start to figure out sort of career-wise, what am I going to do? And around the same time, my ex, he had, started his own businesses, and those were actually starting to grow quite rapidly and do great, which I was happy about, because I had some fears. Oh, is this guy going to be like this or that? But no big red flags. Just the drinking was kind of the flag, but
and that's not necessarily a flag to abuse either.
No, and I found out later that alcoholism doesn't cause abuse. It's just one of those things that someone who's an alcoholic will tend to be more emotional, might not have that filter.
And you can have the people that are abusive when they drink alcohol, which is not a good thing. But again, I always used to joke that I liked my husband better when he drank, because he would become more relaxed, and he would laugh more, and just his demeanor would change to a much nicer version of himself.
It's
debatable. Well, it does play into it in a lot of situations, but it's definitely not a marker.
Oh, yeah. So. And while I'm pregnant, I'm kind of getting along, and he's, so I can't drink when I'm pregnant, and I have no desire to, and, but I'm still like the cool chick. I go out and party with everybody, and I remember my ex was like really still hitting it hard, and I remember I brought up to him, I was like, hey, let's go, I'm kind of tired now. Well, why don't you just go home? You can, I'll just stay out for a while. And I said, oh, okay, that's okay. I'm the cool chick. I didn't say I'm the cool chick, but I'm thinking I'm the cool chick.
You're thinking, yeah.
And I remember him just, getting completely drunk at one of our baby showers. And I remember asking him, you're not going to drink like this after the baby's born, right? Oh, no, not at all. Not of course. And I remember very close to my due date, one of his friends flies into town. And they, like, some, friend from law school and, just a bunch of law school friends were like, we're going to live it up like we did in law school again. And so I was going to be the designated driver, and I said, hey, sure, cool. I'm thinking I'm the cool chick. And I don't, I haven't minded this sort of stuff up until now. It hasn't, it hasn't been that bad. Well, I remember we picked up his friend from the airport, and we had about an hour drive home, and they were all like not just like inebriated, not just tipsy, or like they were really all drunk. There was about, my ex and two of his friends were in the car, like really over the top drunk. And his friend who was in the car seat next to me, or in the passenger seat next to me,
was like so flew in, I assume.
Yeah, who just flew in, was so out of his mind drunk that he was punching the windshield. And I remember making a remark to my ex, like, is he okay? I'm like clutching my tummy. I was like, I'm kind of feeling nervous here. And at this point, again, I'm like a very, trying, so nice. I'm different now. Now I'd be very clear, like, this is unacceptable. You guys need to take an Uber. But back then, I was like, is he okay? And he ended up punching the windshield so hard he broke it. And that just stressed me out so much.
That's not so easy to do.
No. And seeing someone be so drunk that they punch a windshield so hard that they break it, after me saying things to my ex, and, the passenger is looking at me as well, and he can't even speak. I think he was just so far gone. It just stressed me out so much. And the next, and again, the conflict avoidance. I just told my ex, is he going to pay for it? And I wasn't even being that assertive with him. I was just sort of like, oh, is he going to pay for it? Well, I hope so, because it's kind of not cool. And, it's going to be expensive to have a baby. And, what if I don't go back to work? We were talking about all sorts of scenarios. So, he's like, I'll work on it. I'll talk to him. He's my friend. And so everybody was going out the next night, and I just said, oh, I have a stomach ache, or I'm really sleepy and stuff. It really was, I just didn't want to be around all these drunk people. And my ex was so drunk when he finally came home. Like, people had to carry him in. And I don't know. It's just, I can't say, oh, that was awful of him. I could have been more assertive, but I started to see, like, kind of, there were certain things happening in my mind about, like, wow, like, I'm not being one of those really demanding pregnant women, but the few little times I'm asking for things, I'm not getting them. And it's a pattern from family, right, I guess.
Well, and even if it's not, that's definitely a pattern of abuse. You start to find that your wishes and no matter how normal they are, or how, limited they are, it's almost like you'll start to see that in order for the abuser to do anything for you, it's like you're asking them to remove the moon from the sky, or they just ignore you and minimize your wants and needs, interests,
Oh yeah. And actually, I'm just remembering now, there was, while we were married, I kind of let it go, but traditionally in Indian weddings, like, the bride gets many gifts from the groom's side and from her family. It's almost like a dowry or a bride price type of thing. I'm like, oh no, I'm a modern woman. I make my own money. My mom's like, no, these things, you're supposed to get them. You should, you should ask for them. I'm like, no, I'm a modern woman. So I didn't get a lot from his family. And I didn't care, right? And apparently one of my now ex-sister-in-laws got a lot more because she took it freely, and my parents were like, you're a fool. And I was like, I don't care, I'm not greedy. And I remember my ex, especially after I got pregnant, would bring up stuff like, well, your parents didn't pay for the entire wedding, and your sister-in-law's family paid for the entire wedding, and look what a good family they are. Your parents are like, so this and that, always kind of putting down my family. And it was very slow, but we were visiting his family like 4 more times than we were ever seeing or visiting my family. And there was just a lot, and he would always explain it. Well, your family is boring. Like they don't have weddings and all this stuff all the time. My family has a bunch of weddings and somebody's birthday party and this and that. And I was sort of like, okay, sure, why not? It's fun. And, plus with my parents, we're still kind of recovering from that year. I didn't speak to them, and I'm not necessarily desiring to always be around my parents all the time, right? So I didn't necessarily have an issue with it. Well, that just intensified. And finally, it was time, I stopped traveling for work. I was a couple of weeks within my due date and working from home, planning that I'll take, maternity leave for a little while, then go back to work, and we'll figure it out. So it's kind of our plan. And my ex is saying to me many times, like, just come work with me. I was like, I don't know, your company's still kind of new, and I'm not sure. He's like, come work with me. It'll be great, this and that. And I said, okay, I'm not sure. I don't know if I could work in the small business world. I come from corporate. So all this sort of stuff is happening. The baby's born, it was a wonderful moment. But then there's some health issues, minor health issues, thank God. But there's some health issues, and it was just a very stressful situation because there wasn't a lot of communication and just very stressful. The hospital let me stay for free longer because there were some things I think they messed up. And so they...
Yeah, any hospital letting you stay for free, that's...
Yeah, they're like, you can room in or something they call it. And so I was, and I'm just thinking, my baby.
Right.
So I want to be close to the neonatal intensive care unit, and so I'm just in the room, and then he left to go home, and his family flew into town or came into town, and I remember what happened one night is he comes to he was there during the day, and then he comes back around like 11 p.m. and he's like completely drunk. This is while I'm in the hospital, maybe a couple days after, maybe the day after my son got admitted to the neonatal intensive care unit, and he's just completely drunk. And I remember being so upset with them. I was like, how did they let you through in this condition? I was like, how are you coming drunk? And he's like, my son almost died, yesterday. And, what do you expect? And I was like, this is not the way to handle it. And I was like, you said you're going to stop drinking, like as heavy as you used to after our son's born. Our son was just born. So we kind of had this fight about this. So to me, it's sort of like for a while after that, I focused on his drinking because there was huge incidents regarding his drinking. And actually regarding that incident, I remember the next day his mom asked me, he got to the hospital around like 10 o'clock or 9:30, right? And I said, no, he got there around 11. I guess he stopped at a bar. He told me to have a few drinks. And apparently his mom had a chat with them about like, son, you just had a child. You're not supposed to, it's not a time to drink. And he blew up at me about it later. He said, how dare you tell my mom about that? And I said, huh? What? I wasn't supposed to tell her? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean? I thought his family knew about his drinking. And I just thought that's like how their family is, and this is healthy.
Right.
Turns out later they've had concerns about his drinking, and they're kind of going through their own process with that. So, I don't know. So that to me was like the most obvious thing. Where it wasn't so much the disrespect. It was like kind of like, I just thought it was like, he drinks and he gets crazy. A month later after that, one night he stumbles in completely drunk, like my son's like a month old, stumbles in completely drunk, can't even speak. And I was like, you didn't drive home like this, right? And he can't even speak. He's so out of it. Bang, bang, bang on the door. It's the police. He did a hit and run, his car was totaled, our car was totaled. The other car wasn't, he got very lucky. And I remember I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon family group, which is for the people who are relatives or friends of alcoholics. And I remember, he was like, where were you with our child? And I said, well, I went to this meeting because I don't know what's going on here. And he blew up at me like, how dare you go to that meeting? You're trying to ruin our marriage. And just sort of blaming me. And I don't know, just sort of like, how dare you do this? So I stopped going to the meeting. I went to like maybe 2 meetings, and then I finally stopped because of he was just so upset about it. I was like, okay, maybe he said, I'm working on it. Yes, I kind of went too far, but like he's blaming somebody else basically. Right. This ended up being a pattern, always blaming somebody else.
Everything that goes wrong is somebody else's fault.
Yeah, somebody else's fault. And a few months later, something else happens. Like he has to leave his car at the side of the road, and the police, fortunately, again, he got out of getting a DUI, but just all this sort of stuff happening. And I'm telling him like, please let me know, I'll pick you up. And his ego is too big to let me like help him and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I'll cut back. So I finally speak to his brother about it. I was like, okay, who's somebody you trusted, that's not going to make this a big gossip reputation thing, who maybe talked to him and reach him. His brother's his best friend, and his brother and I confronted him. and, you know, a mini intervention. And I remember he said, well, there's things happening that, you know, that's why I drink. Again, we don't understand, his brother and I don't understand alcoholism and all this. I have a different thinking about this now, but there's things happening that make me drink.
And you don't
I'm going to
understand
talk
what's going on.
Yeah, he's like, he said basically he's going to talk to me later about it. So then later he says, well, you know, because, I'm trying to remember if I went back to work at this point yet or not. I think I did go back to work, or did I not? Okay, well, it may not be relevant,
right.
but he talked to me later about it and said, there's things that you do that just upset me so much. And me, because, you know, I'm someone who tries to be very kind to others, nice to others. I want to be, you know, I have this idea of like, I want to try to be as perfect as I can. I'm like, what am I doing? Maybe I'm just not aware of what I'm doing. I forgot exactly what he said, but he said, I'm doing certain things, or I need to, you know, oh, you haven't lost the pregnancy weight yet, and this and that. And so I sort of treated it as like, oh, maybe I am bringing this out on him. He has a lot of pressure on him, right? We have a baby now. He maybe feels more the provider pressure. You know, I'm making excuses for him as well. And
it's very common.
Yeah.
And again, you see, you know, as your story fleshes out, you can see that I, the husband, have an issue with drinking. I've had it for obviously a very long time, even before he met you.
Yeah.
That his family was concerned, but I need somebody to blame. So it's your fault. You have a problem with my drinking, so it's even more your fault.
Oh, yeah.
You're the cause of my drinking.
I'm the cause
you
of it.
make me do this.
Right, and I'm not being understanding.
Yes.
And he and I had even talked about things like, you know, what's a harmonious husband-wife relationship? And, you know, he knew, like, I kind of agreed that it is better if, like, maybe the husband has a little bit more leadership role. You know, obviously the wife always has veto power, always has a say, but, you know, he kind of understood that. And then he would start telling me stories about stuff I didn't hear before we got married, but after we got married, stories about, oh, my uncle, his wife left him and took the kid, and he hasn't seen his kid, you know, in like 18 years. And I was like, really? What happened? She just left one day? He's like, yeah, we don't know. She just left. And I was like, that's so strange. Well, did he fight to see the child? No, because she left the country. You know, this, I guess, was in India. Right. She left and came to America. I mean, he didn't really fight to see his son. No, he got really depressed over it. Found out later that his uncle's an alcoholic, was violent with his wife. Because it was just strange to me that, like, why would she leave?
Left for absolutely no reason.
Yeah, I was
right.
like, does she have another, like, a boyfriend? Was she having an affair? And then people would talk about, like, oh, she was so nice, she was so nice. And then later on, my ex, I remember he said to me one day when he started, so things escalated. Like, let me get to that point. So things started escalating. So I went back to work briefly. It was just way too much. It was, I mean, it's not my career was not a 40 per week job. It was like a 60-hour per week job and very competitive, and it was just too much.
And now you have the baby.
And the baby. And we had a nanny. Like, we're very privileged and lucky to have a nanny. And now that I think about it, I think my ex was, because a lot of responsibility was on him as well. Like, with the baby, I was completely caring for the baby. He, you know, was hardly involved with that. And I thought, hey, that's fine. You're working. I'm off. I don't mind. And it's just funny. Even in his own family, his brother and his brother's wife, you know, they just had a baby as well a month before us. And they're both busy medical residents. You know, they're both were, you know, finishing their doctor MD training. And his wife was like, you got to pitch in with me. I don't care who's on duty, who's on call, whatever. And I thought, well, I guess they're different because they're both working, but I'm not. Well, I went back to work, and I don't think he wanted to be that involved. It's too much. I don't know. Basically, he agreed with me, like, yeah, just go on extended leave, and maybe you come work with me for a while. And we'll keep the nanny. And I was like, oh, great. Well, man, awesome life. You know, I can, like, do baby classes with my child. I can have a nanny if I want to go, like, work out and all this sort of stuff. So it really felt like a dream life in a way. And I started working with him at the office. I wasn't crazy about it, but he said, look, you can help me a lot, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, fine. You know, maybe it's me earning my keep. I don't know. He made me feel like I had to earn my keep or something. Now I'm like,
you had to contribute in some other way other than being a mom.
Yeah. And running the house and all this sort of stuff. And so I started working in the office, and, you know, we had the nanny, but I had a flexible schedule. So, I mean, things were great. Financially, we didn't change. You know, his business had taken off enough that it kind of already overtaken my salary, and I thought it was great. I mean, I could go to take my child to tons of baby classes, had mommy groups, and all this. But then in the background, there's these, like, incidents happening, and he's blaming me that I'm not being a good wife, and I didn't treat his grandmother the way I should have, and his family would come to visit, his mom would rearrange the kitchen, and then he would, say like, well, of course she's going to rearrange it because you didn't help her cook or something. And like, you knew when you married me, I'm an amateur cook. I'm not like those traditional Indian women. And, who cook from scratch and do everything. And I said, I would like to cook from scratch, but it's going to take me some time to get there. I'm not used to it. I'm not in the habit of working, caring for a child and cooking from scratch. And just, there's other incidents happening. And basically, my son turned 1, and then after my son turned 2, there were some, at the time I considered them kind of like family crises and things. With the business, there were some issues. He got sued by a very large competitor, so there was some stress with that. And then in his family, there's things happening as well. So I talked, one of his uncles, his wife had left, I found out later, right? And, he had been violent with her and was an alcoholic. And then another one of his uncles suddenly has a stroke. And then it comes out that he's been, his wife just recently divorced him. And, he also has addiction issues and this and that. And with my ex, it seemed to really bother him. And I was like, were you really close? And I guess they were somewhat close, but I hadn't even met this uncle.
Right.
This uncle lives in the United States. Yeah, they didn't have our wedding. So it's like, okay, I'll respect that. But I don't know. It was just, I just feel like it was family crisis, like, sort of things happening. And finally came to the point that he said, look, I don't think you should work at the office anymore. And I said, okay, I agree. I don't feel like I'm having the opportunity to do what I want. And said, he's like, just stay home, focus on the home, manage the home, and maybe later get a job and stuff. And I said, okay. And now, at the time, I was also doing a lot of volunteer work, and I know that bothered him. This volunteer work I did, though, I was on the executive board of a nonprofit. It was volunteer. But, they flew me out to California for a conference. I was meeting, elected officials. It was a great opportunity, not only to maintain a lot of my skills from my corporate job, but just to make contacts. I was new to South Florida. I moved here, never lived here. Making friends. The moms group I had, a lot of them came from that group, and just other friends and contacts. And, it's funny, I remember thinking at the time, is he jealous of that? Because I remember they said, we're going to fly you to California for this conference, and suddenly he's like, oh, well, I can't watch our child over the weekend because I have to go for some legal conference. I said, oh, that's a funny coincidence, okay. And, I used to do this volunteer work, but all of a sudden when I'm in a leadership position, and oh yeah, guess who I met today? I met the mayor, blah, blah, blah. And, suddenly he's not happy for me. I'm winning awards, and he's almost mad about it. And well, you're neglecting your family, you're neglecting, your home.
Do you feel like he was trying to pull you away from anything that got you out into the world?
Oh, absolutely. Now I realize
there's a whole thing, with the power and control, and there's a whole thing with abuse and isolation. And you already mentioned spending all the time with his family, and I can 100% relate. My mom to this day says, I missed you. You weren't here. Because we were always with his family, and he never wanted to be with my family. And if he was with my family, he made it very uncomfortable on me, not to them. He put on the happy, I'm the wonderful person that should be married to your daughter face. But, and then I saw the same things when I taught and I was with little kids all day. That was okay because I was making money and putting him through school. But when I advanced my career and I went to law school, even though it was his encouraging, when I got accepted and was making friends and was out there in society with, adults, then all of a sudden it was issue after issue. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. You can't be there. You shouldn't, those people aren't a good influence on you,
That's so interesting here, because it's funny, one thing I haven't been reflecting on everything that happened. One thing I haven't been able to piece together.
There's a lot to reflect, and it's just been a year for you, so there's a lot to work through.
But one thing that was confusing was why did he want me so much to keep on working and contributing, and why was he respectful for so long when I was traveling for work and bringing money? And it's interesting. I'll have to read through your blog post to kind of maybe see what I see in your experience, because it's like, yeah, they like that you're contributing, or they get control, I guess, out of like what resources you can provide or something, but they want control over that. It's not like,
and he was building his business, correct?
Yeah, he was building his business.
So you were the primary breadwinner. I was the primary breadwinner. When that dynamic changes and they are on equal footing, or again, like you said, his income overcame yours, you're no longer needed to be the primary breadwinner. And I tell people, and I will just put this out there as a disclaimer, I mean, I'm not a therapist. I'm not, this is not something I've studied outside of my own experience and the experience of others and what I've read and what I've educated myself on. But this isolation piece and encouraging you to the benefit of them, and then not encouraging you when it no longer benefits them, is very consistent.
It is,
and again, in different ways. It might not be that you're the breadwinner, but it might be that you are a stay-at-home mom and you do cook, clean, and do everything, or in a lot of cases you are the primary breadwinner and you take care of the house, but maybe keeping you from family, keeping you from friends, discouraging you from having your own group, moving you to a place that takes you far away from your security. You had a job in DC, you were now down here for him. Your job, even though it was paying the bills, no longer was as important.
Yeah, no, I'm shaking my head to all of this. That's making a lot of sense. You've given me a lot to think
Here's
about.
Some more to roll around in your head.
That's been, because I'm trying to process all of this, because everything I went through, I mean, first I have to find a way to just get through every day.
Yes.
And get through the crises.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, get through, I got through the big crisis, but I still have like little mini crises or flare-ups that I have to deal with. But there's things that I know are holding me back a little bit, because it's just confusion and just like, why did he do that? And why did I let myself do that? And even though part of me is like, no, I did the best I could based on what I knew at the time, my life experiences, it all happened for a reason. I am spiritual. I do believe things happen for a reason, and it's part of my journey, good and bad. But there's always those times that you have doubt, like, well, maybe it's not really part of my journey. Maybe I have responsibility there.
Right. You start doubting and questioning yourself.
Yeah, doubting and questioning.
I think that's a good thing. Not the doubt part. But I think it's important for us when we're, and again, I don't think it matters what trauma you've been through, but especially if it's one where you've been gaslighted, where you've been manipulated, where there has been, some kind of an abuse, be it psychological, verbal, physical, no matter what, they all hold the same purpose, and that's control over another person. And when you're the person that's being controlled, you almost, I think, feel guilt that you've allowed that to happen to yourself, especially if you're a strong individual. You're like, why did I let that happen? And, part of that is trying to figure out what your thoughts were at the time, and like you said, how you saw the world, and how you reacted to certain things, and why you reacted that way. And then that carries out into, I find myself doing that a lot now, and it tends to be a topic of a lot of my more recent blog posts, is that I find myself very depressed, or I find myself triggered by something. And oftentimes it's like, I'm like, okay, why exactly? What happened that I got triggered? Like, I won't even know.
Yeah.
I'm just like, all of a sudden I know I'm in a good mood and everything's peachy keen, and then out of nowhere, I'm anxious and I'm upset. And sometimes that even triggers like a long-term anxiety and depression. And I'm sitting there going, what happened? How did this happen? What? I don't understand. Everything was going well. Yeah. And I have to go back and like pick apart the situation and try to figure out what it was that triggered me, so that I can avoid having that same reaction in the future. Not avoid situations, but avoid having the same reaction to those situations.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of it's like, okay, for the future, what will I do? Right now, I have no interest in meeting somebody for a romantic partner. It's just, I don't know. I just have no interest. There's outside of me that's like, oh, it'd be nice. But, I don't know. I just have so much. I feel like I still need to get in a understand better, what happened. And I just have so many doubts about everybody I'll meet, that, like, is he going to turn out the way my ex did? Because my ex, I didn't see the signs. And later on, now people tell me, like, well, he would make those, like, chauvinist comments. And I thought, well, it doesn't bother her, so why am I going to interfere? Right. My parents claim they knew all along, but I think it's hindsight. It's 2020.
Yeah. And that's a different situation, I think, because they were... It sounds that they were pessimistic about anybody that wasn't chosen for you anyway.
Yeah,
so.
And they actually later on, because my ex was such a charmer, I mean, he charmed everybody in my family's hometown. Like my family, he charmed a lot of them because they thought, he's such a nice guy. He's so friendly, he's so funny. Yeah. Oh, he's such a good speaker. He's so smart. So everyone thought this guy's like the funnest guy, coolest guy. I'm thinking of trips we'd take back to, where my parents live, and, my parents would have like a little party, invite a lot of, their friends, and we put together, hey, we're going to put together a fun bingo game. And everyone thought that was like just the most fun thing. Oh, men against the women. And I remember that bingo game that he and I put together, mainly me, but, he did it. I was just like kind of controlling the, the computer that was being projected. I remember, he said, okay, let's do like men against women. And I was like, oh, how fun. I said, okay, like men first, right? That's how it goes with Indians. And the ladies were like, no, ladies first, ladies first. And I think it has to do with maybe like where, the part of India my family's from. Like it's, I don't know, men don't eat first. It's kind of more maybe British influenced or something, ladies first. Where he's from in India, actually men do eat first. And I remember that was a big deal like with his family. And all these like little kind of things that he would always bring up to me. I think they all added up to where, my son was now 2 and had recently turned 2. And, finally, like I said, we decided, okay, I'm not going to work in the company anymore. I'm doing the volunteer stuff. Oh, he took away the nanny. Oh, no, nanny. You don't need this. You're staying home. And I'm like, okay, fine. And there were just like little things like, oh, hey, they're paying for me to go to this women in politics thing on Saturday where we get to meet some real local lawmakers, and it's a great opportunity. Can you watch our son this Saturday? Oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. All right, I'm ready to go. I'm not watching our son. Why not? I remember I have to go to this thing. They're paying for me to go, and I really want to go. No, I'm not watching our son. You've been lazy about, you didn't get every, blah, blah, blah done, housework. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I'm so not a conflict person. I just say, okay. And I just grab our son and leave. And, you can't really go to a professional event with a 2-year-old. I learned slowly ways to keep him occupied, but it's not going to work in like that type of environment. So maybe it's a pride thing like you were talking about, that you're sort of like, okay, I'm a strong person. How can I be in this? Okay, fine. I'm not going to let him know that he messed up my day. So I actually went to the museum with my child and did something else and came home, and he might have asked, and I said, oh, it was fine. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just other things started happening, like just not watching our child ever, trying to make things difficult. One of the big things he did was one day he said, look, we need some money to pay for some big thing. And, I'm going to give a personal loan to the company or something. He says, the money that's in your, that account that you had from before we got married, you need to transfer that to our joint account. And I said, no, that's the money I made and I saved from before we got married. He's like, no, you should have brought it in anyways. Don't you know? And he's making up some stuff about the law, and, I don't know the law and stuff. And he says, you're not going to see our son. And he grabbed our child out of our child's nursery, left, took all the car keys with him, and just left me in the home and said, you're not going to see I will never let you see your child ever again. This was like one of the big things that I remember happened. And I was despondent, and I texted a friend of mine. She's like, you need to talk to a lawyer right now.
Yeah.
Kind of go through some connections, speak to lawyers. She's like, don't transfer the money. It sounds like this is divorce. And I remember thinking, like, why are these lawyers always crazy about going down the divorce route? I'm just trying to find out if I transfer the money, and the worst case scenario, I don't want to know immediately, like, talking about filing for divorce. And, and I feel really stupid about this now, but I end up transferring the money. To our joint account. And this is where I get a little emotional, because I'm just like, why did I do that? That was such a ridiculous demand. Because
you want to believe that that person that you marry has your best interest in mind. And then you had the added layer that he held your son hostage. And even if in the back of your mind you say, oh, he would never do that. He would never take my son and not let me see him again. But he did take your son. and he
Yeah.
did leave you isolated.
Yeah, and and I remember thinking, oh, maybe he's just really, really stressed out, and he never
rationalized.
Yeah, I rationalized it. Maybe he's really stressed out. Maybe it is, maybe, I don't know. I just thought maybe it's an isolated incident. I grew up with rage, so people do crazy things when they're full of rage, right? So I transferred the money, and then things kind of got better. And then I remember another thing happened. Sign us up for health insurance and stuff. Like I guess we switched something with our company, and so we had to sign up through, just directly with the insurance company. So I signed us up, and then the insurance cards came, and it had my name listed as the primary because I was the one who signed us up. But it covers our whole family. When I was the primary earner, my name was on the insurance card too, as primary. Remember, he looked at it and he threw it at me, and he said, "This needs to change, or I'm divorcing you. I don't want your name first. I'm not, Mr. My last name." And I remember being like, geez, what's the big deal? Like, I didn't say that to him, but I remember thinking,
you're like, it's an insurance card.
Like, why is it such a big deal? And I was like, well, maybe he's sensitive right now. And just all these little things started adding up. And then finally, I don't remember what happened, but I started just avoiding him. And, he had his alcohol stuff going on as well. That had been going on for a while. It would flare up and down. And, he wasn't even sleeping in the same bed. And, I didn't know half the time if he came home at night. I mean, we were, even in the same anything. And finally one day, I think it was Father's Day actually. So we hadn't kind of spoken for maybe a week. And, I'm like, oh, it's Father's Day. Still, I have my son go up to him. And he just like rejects my son, doesn't, just walks away from him. I remember being like, geez, like why put our child in the middle, but okay, maybe he needs to let his anger calm down. I can even imagine now, like growing up, like, oh, dad's mad, like, you have to give him a while, like maybe a week or two to calm down. So this is Father's Day. He rejects my son's like gift that obviously I helped my son put together. My son's only 2, so he's a little, he doesn't totally know. He's just like, oh. And then finally he speaks to me and he says, I want a divorce. And I've already filled out the papers and we can save a lot of money because I can do it. Divorces are easy. And maybe the pride of me, whatever, I'm like, oh yeah, me too. And so he starts going over everything and saying this is like the, how we'll do parenting, this and that. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. And then finally, I guess it's like, okay, we'll file it tomorrow. And I said, okay, well, I want to I want to talk to an attorney and look over it. No, why are you going to do that? Like, you're always doing this stupid stuff. Something he kind of put me down. And then he's like, oh, well, I guess I can't save it off right now anyways. Okay, so we'll talk about it tomorrow. I said, okay, fine. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table. We had kind of talked over this at the kitchen table. He left, left the home. And I just started crying at the kitchen table because I don't want to be divorced. I don't want to, I was thinking of our son, that like he should grow up with 2 parents. And I remember thinking to myself, well, it's not like he's hit me yet. Like I don't hate him. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe I've done certain things. Maybe I'm not being that good wife. Maybe I'm not being a good wife. Maybe I'm being too bossy. Maybe I am being whatever he was complaining about. And I feel like a fool about this, but I ended up writing him a letter. Because he was already, again, sleeping, not separate from me. And I wrote him a letter just saying, I'm sorry, I haven't been a good wife, and you're an amazing father, this and that. This, like, letter. I feel pretty stupid. I know I'm not stupid. I was doing the best I could at the time, based on, what I thought would help. And I wrote this letter. And, again, I don't know if he's home or not home. And then a few days later, he... because I would wake up early with our son, normal time. He usually would wake up late, hungover and stuff. But, he woke up one day and, oh gosh, and I remember like he, if he fell asleep on the couch and, I'd come down with our son and he would complain like, why are you making a racket? It's like noon. Yeah. And, just tiptoeing, like literally like tiptoeing around in eggshells, all this sort of stuff. So I think one day he slept in the guest bedroom and then, he was like, was getting ready to leave for the office, and he said, hey, I got your letter, I'm going to talk to you about it later. I said, oh, okay. And then, so I'm like on pins and needles, like, I hope he accepts it. I mean, it's crazy. Like, how did he make me, after like this kind of, I guess, financial, verbal or emotional abuse and manipulation, the gaslighting, like it's all your fault that I drink, and it's all your fault.
You believe that you've caused it to come to this point, and you're still clinging to. What were you clinging to?
just this idea that, well, I like to take responsibility for myself. I like to be accountable for my actions and be the best and the perfect person I can be. And maybe I'm just, I'm aware this is the second relationship I've been in. My ex had many, many relationships before me, most short term. But I just thought, okay, maybe, maybe he's just mad. Again, it's just that, he's just mad. It's like, I don't know.
What happens if you're a better wife?
And so this is a rhetorical question because I know the answer to this, but in your mind, what happens if you're a better wife and if you do things better and if you stop making him angry and if you stop making him...
That's an excellent question, Amy. And that's exactly what happened the next few months. It was like, I thought I was perfect. I made sure by the time he came home, there was a warm meal ready for him. All the toys were picked up. That, every morning there'd be a delicious breakfast for him. That all the laundry was, put away. Everything was clean. Everything was perfect. And I remember actually, I found this out later, that he told his family that I asked for a divorce. This was like his manipulation and games he was playing. And his brother flew out to try to help us work through things. And I remember talking to his brother about he's still drinking pretty heavily. His brother's like, really? Okay, I'm going to talk to him about it. And before, while I'm being the perfect wife and everything, his brother, as his brother's leaving and stuff, he texts me separately and says, hey, I talked to him, we're going to do a 30-day no drinking challenge. I was like, okay, cool. He leaves and stuff. And I remember his brother, he had just dropped his brother off at the airport. And he's like, hey, you want to, join in a bottle of wine with me? I'm like, no, thanks. And I remember thinking okay, maybe it starts the next day or a few days from now.
Right.
And I remember his brother asked me, hey, how's the no drinking challenge going on with him? And I said, oh, it's not going on at all. And his brother, I think his brother called me and said, well, do you ask him about his drinking still? If he's drinking so heavily? I said, I can't ask him. I said, he blows up at me. He's like, how dare you? It's all your fault that I even feel the need to drink and that I'm so stressed out. And his brother said to me, you sound like one of those abused women.
Wow.
His brother said that to me. I said, wait. I said, no. I said, he hasn't hit me or anything. He throws stuff, but, it hasn't really hit me. And his brother's like, but you can't, he acts like that when you ask him about that. And I don't know. I don't totally remember the conversation because I was just so, floored by,
right.
What? Abused woman? What are you talking about? So I'm like, okay, let it go. I'm not going to bother him. I thought maybe if I'm the perfect wife, maybe it's true. Maybe his stress will go away. Maybe home will be a sanctuary for him rather than a place where he feels like he has to drink. I didn't understand alcoholism. I didn't understand abuse. I'm thinking I'm going to make home life so perfect for him. And, I'm always going to dress up kind of dress up like a real housewife type or something. And I don't know. I thought I was being the perfect wife as much as I could. And I'm asking him for feedback. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. But I was. And he always had, issues still. But he's like, but you're doing better. You're doing better. And I haven't seen my parents at this point, in a long time, almost a year, hardly speak to them. He had convinced me that they're drama, and they are kind of emotional people and stuff, but he just kind of convinced me, don't, in our culture, the woman goes more to the man's family, and look at how many problems my brother is having, my ex-brother-in-law is having, because apparently his wife was demanding equal treatment and this and that, and I was like, oh, well, you're right. Maybe they wouldn't be fighting, because they were having their own fights and stuff. But so long story short, I finally go to visit my parents. I think there was a wedding of a friend. So I flew back to see my parents. He refused to go. And he said, I'm not going to go. I need to work. I said, okay. And he'd been using that excuse a lot. I still remember the mom's group I was a part of. Somehow, he'd always complain still. Even, I'm being perfect wife, he's still complaining. Made it a reward. Oh yeah, you can go with the moms to play date or whatever. And, he would not go. I'm getting a little all over the place. But, for a while, there had been this pattern of, this mom's group, the dads would be involved,
Mm-hmm.
It was mostly stay-at-home moms, some part-time working moms, but stay-at-home moms, and then, the husbands were working, and, we would have, hey, Friday night, we're going to do potluck with the dads, the whole family. Right. He would never want to come. He would be mad about it. Wouldn't come to the birthday parties for the kids, our child's buddies, right. And always had an excuse. And I remember even the other dads who had met him, because he had gone occasionally in the past, but now he'd completely said, I'm not going. the other dads are like, well, geez, I'd like to make that excuse too. I need to work, you know, I didn't want to come here today for, you know, also frozen birthday party, whatever. And, I know. So again, the same thing about like, oh, I'm not going to, you know, visit your family and stuff. I'm not going to this wedding. And I go visit my family, and they, you know, my parents were saying like, what's going on? Like, what's going on over there? I said, well, every couple has its ups and downs, and there's been a lot of family stress, and my parents are like, but you never come visit us. I was like, oh, well, things are really busy, and, you know, just all these kind of excuses. And, you know, my parents, I guess they've been concerned for some time, kind of like what you talked about with your mom. She, like, you know, just felt like they didn't see you. And then I remember my parents saying like, yeah, well, you know, we called him and he said, oh, that, you know, he claimed that you had never told him about this wedding and coming to visit us. And I said, what? No, I told him, but he said he had to work. There's some important thing at work, you know, that he had to do. I said, no, he was putting the blame on you. And I said, no, I wanted him to come if he could, but I respected if he didn't want to. So all this, like, you know, manipulation going on, all this stuff going on. And I'm like, okay, you know, this is strange, but whatever. And, you know, I see some of my friends that I grew up with, and, you know, this little trip, you know, home kind of reminded me a little bit of who I am. And it was great. I had a great time. And the problem started immediately when I landed. I landed, okay, so I have my child, I have his car seat, I have like 2 luggages, like all this stuff. And I called him and said, hey, we got all our stuff now, are you going to pick us up? And he said, you were supposed to call as soon as your plane landed. And I was like, okay, well, we're here now. Take your time. We're just hanging out. He finally comes, and it was pretty late at night, actually. It was like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It was like one of the last flights. And, you know, I take our child out, and I said, hey, can you help set up the car seat and all of that? And, or at least, like, watch our son. He's not helping me at all. He picks up our son. I'm, like, trying to put the car seat together, and he's like, you dummy, that's not how it works. And, like, you know, I'm coming from having spent time with family and friends, and I'm just like, okay. And, and that, actually, I'm reminded of another thing. Before I left to go see my family, he had agreed with me that we'll go to marital counseling. And I remember I found specifically a male marital counselor. And I made the appointment like the day before I was leaving with our son. And I told him the night before, and he said, oh, this is too short notice, I can't go. Counselor said, go meet with me anyways. And I remember that counselor told me, look, you know, you can tell people that I will talk to you, but if you talk to me in a disrespectful way, I will not talk to you. Right? It was basically about setting boundaries is what he kind of told me, and just telling people in a nice way, I don't respond to that type of name calling.
How well did that work out for you?
Well, he was calling me dummy, and then, you know, finally I get everything in the car, and I'm like, whatever, I can do it myself. And, you know, the whole way home, he's just, you know, berating me, just kind of saying, like, you know, you stupid this, like, you know, you left some dishes in the sink, and you didn't even call me, and like just like completely digging into me. And I said, listen, there's a way to express your opinion in a respectful way, and you're not expressing your opinion respectfully. I'm open to your opinion, but the words you're using is not respectful. And I think that just blew up at him. I mean, he just blew up at me. I think he got so enraged by that, and he kept on going off and off and off. And I said, you know, I wonder if you have the guts to say this, what you're saying right now, in front of my parents or your parents. And I remember debating, should I call his mom or should I call my dad? And I decided, okay, I'm going to call my dad. I said, Dad, you know, you're asking what's going on here. Why don't you talk directly to my, you know, to hubby, to my husband? And my ex got out of the car, left me locked in there because I was sitting in the back. So it was a child safety lock. So we're like stuck here, stuck in the garage. And he goes, so I can't hear, and starts going off on, you know, I could hear a little bit, but he was basically saying like, you know what, your daughter's crazy. She needs a mental institution, blah, 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 blah. They're talking for a long time.
Telling the story.
Yeah, and you know, in a way, like
it's mind-blowing.
This is drama. It was drama, but I'm glad, because I think the fact that my dad heard firsthand from him, my parents were like, something's wrong with this guy. Something's wrong with this relationship. Thank goodness they didn't doubt me about that part. So basically, what happens is, you know, he has this like, I don't know how long, 20-30 minute conversation with my dad. Finally, it comes back. He throws my phone at me. Says like, talk to your dad. Talk to your dad. So you know, I listen. And I'm crying, I think, at this point. I said, I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't tell you this stuff was going on. My dad's like, look, you guys are both very emotional right now. It's very late at night. I think you guys should go just sleep on it. We'll all talk tomorrow. Okay, just go to bed, you guys. Just, sleep on it. That's the best thing for you right now. Just go to bed. I said, you're right, Dad. So he grabs my son. He opens the back seat, grabs my son, and starts grabbing like some of the luggage, and then like leaves me locked in the car. So I have to crawl to the front. And I go in the house. I mean, these are minor things, but I guess in the context of everything.
Not. And I think that's what's important, because you said these are minor things, and they're not. And I don't say that to embarrass you or reprimand you, but I think that that's so important, because these little minor, incidences are two things. One, they're things that build on each other over time, and they're constant and constant and constant and constant. And two, if you think on that, and now I've been blessed to be in a very healthy relationship for the past, almost 2.5 years. And it took me a long time to meet this person and get there. But when I think about incidents like that, or things that my ex would do to me, and I think, would my boyfriend do this to me? And absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Not under any circumstance would he leave me locked in the back of the car, or lock me in a bedroom, or lock me out of the house and force me to, beat on the door and beg forgiveness to get back in. Those are not healthy behaviors. Those are very abusive, very controlling. That is an individual saying, I control you. You don't have a choice in this situation, I control you. I have your child, you want to get out of the car, fine, then you beg, you plead, you crawl, you crawl over the seat, you demean yourself in essence, you lower yourself below almost like this human standard of, we wouldn't treat somebody we respect that way, or someone we love that way.
No, I think, you're so right. And I think it's because sometimes you tell people this, and maybe other people have higher tolerances for drama, but they're like, but...
And there's a difference between drama and a relationship, and I think this is really important too. There is a difference between like a toxic relationship where you have two people that are butting heads, and again, I don't know what the therapeutic word for it is. Mm-hmm. It's still not healthy, right, for two people to be just demeaning one another and fighting all the time and arguing with one another and butting heads. Yeah. There is a difference between that and when you have one person that is asserting, demeaning, controlling, and putting down the other person. That's the difference between just like a toxic, bad relationship that shouldn't be happening between two people, and one in which you have abuse taking place.
No, and I've been trying to learn that better. It'll probably take me years.
It's a fine line, I think, personally. But I mean, I do think that there's a difference. When you have an abuser that's controlling, that's different than you have two people that just don't get along, or they're just two mean individuals, or two self-absorbed individuals that fight and bicker with each other all the time. Yeah. It's when one person is asserting that power and control. I mean, that is the definition of domestic violence.
Yeah, so I crawl over, crawl between the seats, and finally I get inside. And I remember my ex was so excited. So what'd your dad say to you? I think my ex thought that my dad would be some really old school Indian guy or old school man, whatever you want to call it, and would say, oh yes, your wife should listen to their husbands. Yeah. No. I think my dad probably just, rather than actually, I'm grateful to my dad, he didn't react with rage, but instead reacted with, look, you guys are both very emotional right now, and what you're telling me doesn't sound like my daughter. You guys should sleep on it. This is too much, right? This is just too much for anybody right now to process. So, my dad, fortunately, at that point didn't react with rage. So I go, I tell my ex this. I said, no. He said, we should both sleep on it. I said, I agree. I think we should both sleep on it. He's like, no, I want to talk about things right now. And I said, look, I'm exhausted. Our son needs to go to bed. It's way past his bedtime. He's like, no, I want to talk about this right now. And he's, coming up to me and trying to engage. And I said to him, I remember when we got married, the way you screamed and shouted at your mom and wouldn't let her, just walk away from an argument you were having. And I'm seeing you're doing the same thing to me now. And he raises his fists and puts it to the side of my face and say, don't you dare say a single word. I'm going to punch you, punch your lights out, or punch you, something like that. And I remember somehow I had the sense to have my phone in the other hand. And I said, okay, I'm going to start recording right away if you do that. And he lowered his hand. And I grabbed my son and I went upstairs and, locked the bedroom door. And I was like, oh my gosh. And like my adrenaline was running. I was like, feel it again. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in an abusive relationship. I was exhausted, but suddenly I had energy. And I was on my phone on the internet, looking up domestic violence hotline, all this stuff, looking at the checklists. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can tick off like almost all of these. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I've been blind all this time. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to call them tomorrow. And I'll wait till he leaves for the office. And I'll call them and sort of see what I should do. Next morning, we don't speak. He leaves for the office. And I call them and I speak to them. And just trying to get information about, like, well, can I just go back to my parents, and then that gets into like child kidnapping, this and that. And I said, well, we'll put you in touch with this other organization that can give you advice. They can't give you legal advice, but they'll tell you about the law. So I'm finding out advice about that. I speak to my parents, and we're all just completely confused. What is this? Is this an isolated thing? I mean, it's just I don't think I told them he tried to punch me. I don't think I told them yet. I think I was afraid of making them more concerned and all this, all that sort of stuff. I'm just trying to figure out what to do. We're trying to figure out what to do. And what happens? Let's see. I think that night he comes home and he says, look, tomorrow I'm going to come by. I need you to sign some, I'm going to come by in the middle of the day. I need you to sign some papers regarding the business. Because I was still a part owner of the business, shareholder of well, we had multiple businesses, but, one of the main businesses. And, I just say, okay. And I'm just, again, I'm trying to figure out what to do. I mean, again, he's only tried, he didn't actually hit me yet. I mean, I guess he tried to. I'm just trying to understand what is going on, what the heck is going on. So next day he comes in the middle. Oh, I forgot to mention. The next day I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. He took all the car keys. Remember talking to the domestic violence hotline about that. And I'm like, great, I can't go get my son milk. Yeah. We've been away for, was it a week? I forgot. It'd been a while. We've been away. Mm-hmm. We had like boxed almond milk, and I gave that to my son, and actually I remember. Okay, so he had taken the car keys anyways at night. He says I need to sign some stuff tomorrow. And the next morning, I think I mentioned we need milk, and maybe he bought it or something. I don't know. The next day, he leaves for work, comes back, and basically says to me, "You need to sign these documents because we're something related to the business." And I said, I'm not comfortable signing anything. You tried to hit me when I came home. In what scenario is it ever okay to hit a spouse? Never. Okay, there's no self-defense. There's no excuse. Okay. And he literally said, well, that's the only way I can control you because you don't listen. He literally said, that's the only way I can control you by doing this stuff. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. I'm not signing anything. And he just starts banging the table. You have to sign, you're going to ruin our lives, and making this huge thing if I don't sign, this huge thing. I was like, I want nothing to do with that business. I don't know what you're doing with it. I want no responsibility towards it. And he's like, okay, well, just sign away all your shares. And I remember thinking to myself, I kind of researched, like that, what can you do if it's under duress? And I remember I'd read something about like just put a UD or something. I don't know. At this point, I'm just trying to be safe, because I remember from speaking to the domestic violence hotline, they said, like, look, you have to start safety planning. When's the right time to leave? Because the most dangerous time is when you leave. And I'm still not totally convinced yet this is like, full out domestic violence. I know it's abuse, but I'm not sure it's full out violence. I'm not sure how extreme he's going to get. And, basically I end up signing this thing, hit my little UD in there. And then I think he kind of left me alone, the rest, for a few days. And then I'm, trying to figure everything out. And meantime, with my volunteer stuff, I'm trying to keep up with that. I'm doing a fun project.
Trying to act normal.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a fun project. I was, on the executive board, and I had a committee, and I was doing this fun project, and I'm like, people kind of knew some stuff was happening, but I said, we have like some family stuff going on, but I didn't want to tell people like, I'm going to try my best to still do this fun project, this fun video I was doing, with the people on my committee. So basically I, take my son with me. I mean, they're kind of used to it now. I bring my son because, my ex won't get a babysitter or pay, will pay for one or watch my child. So it's fine. I make do. I come to meetings with the child, and we go do some stuff related to this. I mean, it wasn't that late at night, just kind of do some stuff for that. I'm like, oh great, I'm gonna edit everything, I'm gonna make this cool video. And I'm speaking to my friend, an actual personal friend of mine who ended up, also volunteering and is on part of that organization, was there. And I told her, he said he was going to punch me. I just told her, just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe all this is happening. I said, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do. I just don't know what to make of all this. And, so we're talking, and then he starts texting me. And he's the type who doesn't really track my movements that much. Well, kind of does, but at this point it hasn't been, I don't know, I'm just not used to it. So he starts texting me like, where are you right now? Where are you with my son? Where did you go? And I told him exactly where I was, the city, what a major landmark. I'm speaking to so-and-so who he knows because, we're a couple friends. And I said, but by the way, we're stopping at the grocery store on the way home. And he's just like, just like for the next hour, texting and just getting angrier and angrier. And I was afraid to go home. And so I called the police and I said, I'm afraid to go home. And, that was the first time I spoke to the police, I think, about everything. And, the police were kind of like, oh, you guys just need to get divorced and all that. I said, well, officer, I said, after today, I think I am going to speak to, I think I am going to look into this because, this forcing me to sign stuff, taking the keys away. He did eventually put the keys back, but then he claimed he never took them away.
Right.
I still think about it, and it's funny, while I'm speaking to the officers about the threats he's making, he calls them and claims I kidnapped our child. And they said, no, she didn't. She's here in front of us. And I guess they went and spoke to him. And I called my parents. They said, look, we're going to get on the first flight out. We're going to be there tomorrow. The first flight we can get was like 2 p.m. It's going to land there in Florida. Well, go stay in a hotel. And I said, okay, I'll go stay in a hotel. And I had a separate credit card, thank God. That was just in my name. Okay, and so I just used that. I stayed in that hotel, and then in the meantime, a friend of mine, a friend, like someone I knew, whose husband I'd met, who's a divorce attorney, I actually called her first thing in the morning, and, very early, like 7 a.m., and I said, hey, any chance your husband can meet with me because my ex has been making threats, it's escalating, and she's like, look, he's busy today, but he said he will speak to you on the way to the office. Spoke to him, he said, look, I'll carve out time for you to meet with you today. I'm like, great. So my parents come into town, we meet with him, he kind of helps us understand everything a little bit better, I guess. And I don't know, we're confused,
Right.
like...
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, a lot. And so my parents are, he said, you have every right to be in the house too, so just go back to the house. And I guess in the meantime, his family called my parents or vice versa, and they're like, they're going to fly into and they're going to do this big family meeting. So basically, I go back to the house, then my ex leaves. Like, he sees my family in there, with me. And then he leaves and he takes a big suitcase, which I believe was probably like certain valuables and things. Now, you don't think about this stuff, right? But later on, you're like, darn it, that would have helped to have like my passport, like my valuables, cash, and all this stuff. So, long story short, his family flies into town. They try to and his brother, the brother who told me I sound like an abused woman. I don't know if I ever told my ex that. I might have. I don't know. But his brother's like, I'm going to be a facilitator, and you guys can, you're going to work out your issues in front of us, and, this is kind of maybe an Indian thing, like, oh, let's have a big meeting, you guys work out our issues.
I think it's well wishes of people that they don't understand the dynamics behind abuse, and they think that it's a disagreement that can be worked out.
No, yeah. And,
I don't know that that's necessarily cultural, to be honest. I think a lot of people really think that as a friend or as a family member that they can interject and help bring peace and happiness and everybody's, Yeah,
they just don't know because I've hit things and I haven't told people the whole story and until it got extreme. And so that doesn't end well, it doesn't end well, obviously. And I still have that, I had made an appointment with the counselor I'd seen. Mm-hmm. And my ex finally says, like, okay, let's go see that counselor. And, just you and me, and then the counselor said, leave your family out of it. And the counselor didn't seem to take it too seriously. Maybe I wasn't explaining it correctly. Maybe that counselor didn't have an experience. with patterns of abuse. He kind of saw it more. I mean, well, he knew that like he needed to gain my ex's trust, so I don't know. But the counselor gives some good advice. And basically, I still agreed. I filed for divorce, but we're planning amicable divorce, and we're supposed to like meet nightly or like every few nights to discuss things. And we agreed things had calmed down. My ex wasn't being insulting, so I thought, okay, well, we can stay in the same house. I have concerns about my son because, my ex has substance issues, so I can keep an eye on my son if we're in the same house, living on different floors. My ex is saying things like, "Oh, I'll always love you," and blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, that's nice. And I started going to, Al-Anon support groups again, so I'm understanding better, like, look, I can't change him, and kind of I'm changing my mind about my attitude towards certain things. The time that he's watching our son, I sort of like, oh, I'm free now to do other things. I'm not, this is kind of interesting. So one night he says to me, I really need to talk to you. And I said, okay, about the stuff we're trying to work out about, XYZ. He's like, I'll always love you, and I think let's give it, we can get a post-nup, let's give it another chance. And I said, look, you should be who you truly feel like you should, who you want to be inside. Because he said something about like, there's things you can change about me. He said, maybe there's things, he can change too. And I said, no, you should be who you truly are. You shouldn't change yourself for anyone unless you want to, unless it's from your heart naturally. Same with me. I want to go through with this, live your life, do whatever you want to do. And he was like, okay, fine. Well, apparently that was like the final rejection. The next night or the night after, that's when he attacked me. It was the night that I had our son. We were living again on different floors of the house. Like one guest bedroom was on a different floor than our master bedroom and the child's nursery. So I was on the top floor, and usually we never go in each other's space. You mightn't, cross each other in the kitchen, all that. Well, one night, I was out with our son, and I remember he texted me, "Where are you guys?" And I said, "Oh, we're about to be home. It's, 9:00 or something." So I come inside, and, son had already fallen asleep, and I go inside the bedroom, I lock the door, and then I hear him coming up the stairs, and I'm like, what's going on? So, I'd already kind of done a little bit of safety planning. So I had my phone. A lot of my safety plan was my phone, which was actually, you need plan B, C, and D too. Yeah, I learned.
Exactly. Things we don't know at the time.
Yeah, you need some backup plans. So, the door is locked, but, there's a way to kind of open it, and he opens it, and he's like, where were you tonight? Starts grilling me, and I said, I don't have to tell you that. And then he lunges at me and fights with me for the phone, pushes me against the nightstand. And then he leaves, and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, he knows what he's doing. He took my phone. And I don't know what he has planned. So I had my laptop. I grabbed my laptop. I tried to use Google Voice. You can't use that to dial 911. So I called my parents, and I said, he attacked me. He took away my phone. I don't know what's going on. Call 911. Meantime, I locked the door again, and then I couldn't move the, dresser furniture was too heavy, so I start like putting shelves. I'm like, let me just empty out shelves, something to kind of barricade. He comes back, and he starts pushing. He's like, what is this? I was like, I'm scared of you. I don't want to talk to you right now. I'm afraid. And he pushes it all, pushes through. All that stuff falls on top of me, and he starts screaming and yelling at me. He sees my laptop open. I go towards the window because I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can shout out the window. I'm trying to think. My son, my son's like asleep, mostly asleep on the bed still. And he grabs my laptop, and I'm like, great, he's going to see that I called my parents and stuff. And then I found out later that he used my computer to record, and I think he was trying to make me seem like I'm crazy and maybe get me Baker acted, where they, arrest you and put you in some sort of mental hold. And he starts saying all sorts of crazy things like, so why are you making up things about me? And I said, I'm not making up anything, He said, your family's crazy, and aren't you crazy too? Just all these really weird,
just random
questions. And I kept on saying to him, I'm scared, please, I don't want to talk to you right now. I'm scared of you. And it's taking forever. I finally start screaming out the window because I think he closes the door, he blocks the door. And I am frantic. I have to be honest. I was frantic. I was afraid. I don't know. He's never, gone this far, and scream out the window. And then I think finally somebody sees me, or apparently my parents had a hard time because 911 is not connected all over the country. So they had to call the sheriff, all this stuff. So finally the police come. They're shining a light at me. He goes down and speaks to them. I think he apparently told them that I'm having a breakdown or something. they come and talk to me. The officer recognizes me. One of them, I was like, oh, I know you. He's like, I know you too. Didn't I tell you to, he says, didn't I tell you to file for divorce? I said, I did, but we're in counseling. I thought we could live in the same house, save money. We have this.
Yeah. You don't necessarily have a lot of options all the time.
Yeah. So we end up having a decent conversation, and he kept on asking me, did he touch you? Did he punch you? Like, did he hit you? Did he, they're asking me, like, I found out later that I should have said, yes, he attacked me. Like, I didn't understand, like, there's a very...
Are you looking to see if he assaulted you? Or
a very specific word you have to say. And I was, I was still, like, freaking out about, like, yeah, he took my phone. He pulled it out of my hands. We struggled over it. I was, I realized I needed to say, like, look, he grabbed my hands. He, pulled me and then finally pushed me against the dresser to, like, kind of, I guess, fake me out or something. I don't know. That's my best memory of what happened. And, he pushed the drawers on me. I don't know. I was confused. But basically, apparently he played the recording for the officers. And the officer said literally, oh, that backfired on him. Because they could hear he was being like a psychopath or something on there. And I guess they convinced him first to give me my phone back after a lot of back and forth. And then they convinced him to leave for the night. And then they said, look, we don't think you're crazy, but if you continue to be around this man, you will go crazy. What he's, like physical abuse, we don't know, but emotional abuse, you're being emotionally abused. And I thought, wow, what nice officers and stuff. Well, I didn't realize they ended up not writing a police report that night.
Not nice.
I
take my kudos away.
Yeah, and then now I'm in a different place. Back then, this was all new to me. I don't know my rights,
and you're in a different mindset then. And I think that's very important for people to realize that you're, you do not see the world through like a normal set of lenses.
No, and I'm still feeling kind of bad about everything that happened. Oh, there was even drama with my parents where my parents were supportive, but then they're mad because why are you going to counseling with this guy? You're letting him win. And, and
again, it's a lack of understanding.
Yeah, just all sorts of stuff. And even to today, my parents kind of say they still demand why did you let him do that? I was like, okay, why do you think, Mom and Dad? Because you were desperate and you were lonely. Yes, Mom, bingo. Are you happy? It's just, and I'm trying to move on from this. And basically what ended up happening the next morning, immediately I went to my lawyer's office because I thought, oh, lawyers, everyone says lawyers help you. And I said, I need to do a restraining order. He attacked me last night, actually attacked me this time. And, lawyer is busy. Long story short, he says, look, I'm in trial, but my paralegal will help you. So I'm relying on what I thought legal advice of what I need to say, how I file this. I thought, oh, it's going to be pretty easy. No, I found out that there, that it was rejected. And I was just in a complete, what do I do? And they kept on saying to me, whatever you do, if you're supposed to give your son to him for, according to your temporary kind of time sharing or parenting agreement, make sure you do that because that's really bad. And I was like, okay. And so I handed my son over to him, and it was just the next few days I was sneaking into the house, staying at a friend's house. I was just completely confused. And finally I reached out to a domestic violence advocate who's a friend of mine. I won't say her name, but you know who she is. She's who referred.
And you can't.
She's who referred.
Yes.
You referred, I guess, us to each other, and I was afraid to do that too because I was like, I've known her more socially, and how could it happen to me? And one thing I haven't mentioned is my ex was on the board of that nonprofit domestic violence charity.
She actually mentioned that, and I totally forgot.
And that's another reason I don't want to mention the name because because I know people might perceive it a different way. And so my ex, not only a lawyer, has better connections than me, knows the law just automatically better than me. He also understands what domestic violence cases have slipped through, not slipped through, all this stuff. And well, anyways, I reach out to her and she says, look, go to victim services at the courthouse. And they helped me reapply. I didn't get the immediate restraining order, but I got a hearing at least. And I was like, this lawyer, he's a friend, but, he's let me down. I don't want him anymore. And this is around Thanksgiving, so I'm struggling to find another lawyer quickly. Find someone. In the meantime, victim services helps me enter a battered women's shelter. And I'm just trying to figure out what to do because people are scaring me. You'll lose your son. Florida's so strong about father's rights now. but then I'm like, then also like, but if it's a dangerous situation, you know, like battered women's shelter, you can't meet with your ex, and I'm just trying to do the best I can.
So
Yeah.
I want to stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've really hit a climax in your story. And I think that it just goes to show where, you know, how happy and, you know, controlled, and it's shown the deterioration of not only your marriage, but of yourself, how it's potentially affecting your son, and how overwhelming and confusing trying to get out can be. Sadly, we're up against a really strong deadline.
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you more about this. So would you be open to sitting down again? Because I think that all of this information is so important, but it's really like, it's like the second part to the story. And it's, you know, you've decided you need to leave, but there's so much good information here about what struggles you met with the courts and what struggles you met, you know, emotionally, and trying to get therapy through the divorce process, the issues that you ran into with your restraining order, and then beyond that to this past year. And we talked earlier about the cycle of abuse and how it continues when you are not able, basically when you're forced into continuing contact with your abuser, how that cycle of abuse perpetuates itself and it continues just in a different form. And I think all of that is so, so important to talk about. So I would love to do a, you know, round 2 with Rosie and talk about all these if you'd be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you'd like to have me, I'm conscious. I'm like, I you know, it's just a year out. I'm still a little bit long-winded sometimes, but
no,
there's
not at all.
People would be interested in hearing more.
You know, we're just
definitely willing to share.
We're in that time where they're going to kick us out, or we're going to run out of tape, one or the other. It's not really tape, but he laughed at me for calling it tape, but out of space. And I don't want that to happen. But I really, really believe, you know, all of this information, it's not long-winded, it's important information because it shows the progression that you went through. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if everybody heard me, I was just like, wow, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm hearing myself speak. And you said that about your groups that you've gone to. It's like you hear other stories. And a friend of mine, actually there were a couple of us that all went to school together when we were younger, and we've, you know, come back together, and we've all had similar experiences from different perspectives and different stories, obviously at different points in our life, but we laughed, and you know, it's not funny, but you kind of have to chuckle through things, and you have to alleviate the pressure and the stress and the anxiousness that comes up. And we said, do they have a playbook? How is that behavior so intertwined amongst people that have never met each other, and yet their behaviors, their abusive behaviors, their controlling behaviors, their words, their phrases, it's almost like they have a playbook.
Yeah.
And what they express.
It's just, mind-boggling that how, like, what... And I just don't relate to that worldview, because I feel like
exactly.
Any time I get with somebody is really a gift. They're choosing to share that time with me, and sometimes people will do what you want, sometimes they won't. You know?
Exactly. You don't have to agree eye to eye and get along 24/7.
Yeah.
But you know, your story is powerful, and I don't just say that, but I think this is what I keep saying it, and I will continue to say it until people that are listening to all of these podcasts are like, wow, I wish she'd quit saying that. But it's so important for our community to understand the behind the scenes. And I mean that in that I want them to hear different victim stories from beginning to end. I want them to know how difficult it is to leave, and I don't want to gloss over that right now. I think it's very important that we spend the time on that, and you know, they've heard how you got to the point of actually deciding to leave, so we can talk about why was it confusing, why was it, you know, messing with your head so much, what was so difficult about making those decisions, because that is so important. And equally as important is healing after that, and things that people say and how much work it actually takes to get to the point where you could be where you are today, sitting here and talking about your story. And, you know, you've teared up a few times, but I still tear up. And it's been 8 years, and I tell my story so many times that I almost feel like people must be sick of hearing it. I have to remind myself that not everybody has. But it elicits an emotional response because it's something that affects you just so deeply that those wounds take a long time to heal. So I want to thank you for sharing. I know that it's not always easy.
No, and thank you for doing these podcasts. I think it's wonderful, and I look forward to hearing them myself and learning about other people's experiences. And you know,
I'm really excited about this because I want people to know, and I said, it's not a gloom and doom. There are powerful and strong people out there, men and women, who have overcome, and these things are happening. And they are happening next door to you and across the street from you and in your child's school, and it's endless. There's a lot of people that are affected, and there are a lot of people that are doing good and providing services, which we'll talk about next time, that are available so that people can get the help that they need, and how important it is to get that help. Again, that's where I failed miserably. I did not go to counseling or therapy for over 3 years, and that does definitely have very bad effects. So it's, like I said, kudos to you that you sought help and got help, and that you're still continuing to get that support, because you'll be much stronger, much quicker because of it. So, well, thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation. We'll cut this off, and we'll decide what that's going to be. So, and thank you all for listening, and come back for us. Stay posted for when Rosie comes back. All right, have a good one.